Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kathleen Shepard. Kathleen Shepard and her friend Detsy Hughes grew up across the street from each other in the small town of Dayton, Iowa, which has a population of less than 1,000 people. In this quiet town, everyone knows one another. Kathleen was 3 years older than Detsy. In 2013, she was 15, while Detsy was 12. Despite the age difference, they were best friends and did everything together, often walking home from the school bus stop. At approximately 4 p.m. on May 20, 2013, after being dropped off by the bus, they noticed that a red pickup truck was following them. The man in the truck caught their attention by offering them a chance to earn some pocket money. He said he owned a lawn care business and needed help. Although he was a little skeptical about their lawn mowing abilities, he was so convincing that they began to trust him. The man said he could drive them home to get ready, then they would go to work together, and he would pay them right away. However, when they got in the car, he changed his plans. Instead of taking them home, he drove them out of town. When Kathleen and Detsy sensed something was wrong and tried to resist, the man pulled out a weapon and threatened to kill them if they didn't comply. He took them to an old, abandoned house and brought them to a dilapidated barn that hadn't been used for years. He tied them up, threw them face down in the dirt, and warned them that if they obeyed him, they wouldn't be harmed and he would eventually let them go, even offering to give them a ride back to town. At that moment, Detsy realized something was very wrong. First, if he's not planning to kill them, why go so far from the city? Second, the presence of a weapon suggested otherwise from the beginning. Kathleen's last words were, "They don't deserve this." After that, the kidnapper took her into the woods, giving Detsy a chance to escape. Detsy couldn't explain why Kathleen was taken or what happened to Kathleen since she didn't witness it. Although the kidnapper threatened them with a weapon, he was so careless that he left it right in front of Detsy while taking Kathleen away. Detsy was able to loosen her ropes and escape. While fleeing, she grabbed a weapon for protection in case he tried to catch her. Scared, she navigated through the forest, avoiding thorny roots, and then followed a dirt road in search of help. There were no people around. Despite her injuries, Detsy did not give in to the pain. She felt as though the kidnapper was still pursuing her and that escape was impossible. In her desperate situation, she called out for help, and people nearby brought her to the police. Detsy was terrified. During her escape, she had lost her shoes and sustained several cuts on her legs and feet, which were bloody but not life-threatening. While her physical injuries healed quickly, the emotional scars lingered. Although she received rehabilitation, she still struggles with the psychological effects from the traumatic experience. Detsy provided a detailed description of the kidnapper and his car, giving detectives a solid chance of locating him before he could harm anyone else. Later that evening, around 8 p.m., a body was discovered in the countryside, near the area where Detsy was rescued, at a country estate northeast of Dayton, Iowa. The deceased was identified as 42-year-old Michael Klender, who Detsy later recognized as her kidnapper. Interestingly, the cause of his death was not revealed for some time. The situation was confusing because Michael did not leave any suicide notes, and there were no clues about where to search for Kathleen. The police had to conduct the search for her without clear leads. Detectives investigated Michael's background for possible clues and found some information. He had his first trial in 1989 when he was just 17 years old and was from Mason City, Iowa, USA. On February 22, 1989, Michael knocked on Jill Gilsey's door, claiming that his car had broken down and asking to use her phone. Instead of just helping him, Jill offered to give him a ride home so he could deal with his car issues. He accepted her offer immediately without any hesitation. As soon as Jill opened the door, he attacked her, knocking her down, hitting her several times, and trying to strangle her with his bare hands. Despite the brutal attack and severe bruising on her neck, Jill fought back and, with the last of her strength, pushed him away. She was determined to seek justice for this horrific incident. Michael faced charges for second-degree burglary and assault with intent to cause serious injury, both of which were aggravated offenses. However, after his arrest, a judge decided to set a bail amount that was below the maximum for those charges, allowing him the potential to be released. This leniency angered Jill and others, as it seemed the judge underestimated the severity of his actions. Fortunately, Michael could not afford the bail, so he remained in custody. Michael remains in custody, awaiting his sentencing hearing. Jill and many others who know Michael believe he is not receiving the punishment he deserves, which worries them. During the preliminary hearing, a decision was made regarding whether Michael, the 17-year-old, should be tried as an adult or as a juvenile. The juvenile judge chose to recuse himself because Michael Klunder displayed alarming behavior from the start. He had a history of being problematic and aggressive, particularly toward girls. In November of that year, Michael enticed a classmate into the school restroom. He threatened her with a weapon and demanded that she take off her shirt, but the girl resisted and tried to escape from him. In response, he struck her on the head with a metal object and physically assaulted her. This resulted in serious injuries, and the girl spent about a week recovering in the hospital. By February 1989, it was reported that Michael had been released after fulfilling all court orders following the incident with the girl in the restroom. Michael returned to live with his father and stepmother in Mason City. However, he soon began to have aggressive outbursts. Shortly after, he attacked a girl named Jill and was arrested. While in custody, officials advised against allowing him to interact with older inmates due to concerns that he might either act aggressively or be bullied because of the charges against him. However, his skills as a liar and manipulator posed a risk of negatively influencing other young offenders. Facing serious charges, he could be sentenced to up to 12 years in prison and fined up to $15,000. If he had been tried as a minor, he would have faced a maximum of 7 years. This situation provided his lawyer with both a clear goal and leverage. On March 30th, Michael pleaded guilty to attempted burglary and attempted assault with intent to cause serious harm. Just 5 weeks before his 18th birthday, he learned his sentence. Michael was taken to the mental health center in Cherokee for a psychiatric evaluation. While imprisoned, he was sentenced to 5 years for attacking Jill. He spent his 18th birthday in prison and received an additional 2 years for robbery. However, these sentences were to run concurrently, meaning he would still be released after 5 years. This news troubled Jill, but there was nothing she could do about it. The court had decided that extending his sentence would be inhumane, likely hoping he could be rehabilitated despite being a potentially dangerous criminal. Despite the short sentence, Michael's lawyers sought to have it reduced. Their main argument was that he was still a minor, even though he was tried as an adult. Fortunately, in September 1989, the court refused to modify its ruling. 2 years passed, and he completed his sentence for robbery, but he still had 3 years remaining for the charges of bodily harm and assault before his official release. Michael adhered to all court orders and took part in a rehabilitation program for individuals at risk of committing abuse. He took the program seriously and attended all the lectures, but it seemed unlikely that he genuinely wanted to change his behavior. His lawyer approached the case with determination, believing that Michael was ready for release. Michael had a flawless prison record, with no incidents or fights during his incarceration, which worked in his favor. Michael's defenders succeeded in getting his case reviewed, resulting in his release in 1991, shortly after his 20th birthday. However, he was placed on probation. From the start, it became clear that his old habits were resurfacing. In 1992, 2 young girls, both just 3 years old, disappeared near Michael's home while playing in a sandbox. Their parents quickly realized the girls had been abducted and reported it to the police, prompting an immediate search, fearing the worst. An unknown caller contacted the police station, reporting that the 2 missing girls had been found at a bus stop nearly 100 kilometers from their hometown. A passerby noticed a small orange container under a canopy at the bus stop. Upon opening it, he was startled by what he discovered and promptly alerted the authorities. When officers arrived, they found the girls, who were both injured. Though several witnesses had identified Michael as a suspect, he had not yet been charged. One witness recalled seeing him observe young girls from his window, spending extended periods in his kitchen or living room watching as children played outside or as schoolgirls returned home. In light of the girls' abduction, this behavior raised alarm. The day after the girls were located, police visited Michael's home to question him. However, at that time, detectives lacked sufficient evidence. They faced a challenge in gathering information about the kidnappers from the 3-year-old victims without causing further trauma. Due to their young age and fear, the girls were unable to provide meaningful details. After an initial conversation, detectives still had no valuable information. Michael denied any involvement in the kidnapping, and without evidence, the police had no basis to detain him. Michael took advantage of the delay, got into his 1982 Honda, and left the state, heading to Florida. However, his getaway was cut short when the car broke down on the road. This forced him to seek help from a relative who lived nearby. Eventually, Michael was arrested on Christmas Eve. The arrest occurred at a bus stop in Houston, thanks to an anonymous tip received by law enforcement. It turned out that the call had come from Michael's relative, who suspected that he was up to something, even though they had no knowledge of the situation involving the kidnapped girls. The 3-year-old victims lived in the same residential complex in Cherokee, where the troubling events had taken place. Despite appearing to be a safe place under surveillance, it seems he had been watching the girls for a while before realizing they were alone. CCTV footage from the complex showed the girls playing before they suddenly looked away and moved in another direction. Detectives believe Michael managed to attract their attention while remaining out of sight of the cameras. This plan worked. The girls' miraculous rescue was even covered on television. Michael had hidden them in a container, which he sealed and left at the bus stop. If the box hadn't been discovered within a few hours, the outcome could have been very different. It was a fortunate coincidence, along with the vigilance of a passerby, that led to their rescue. Doctors reported that while the children had not been abused, they did have injuries. One showed visible signs of strangulation around her neck. The other girl could have suffered the same fate, but for unknown reasons, the criminal seemed less focused on her. In a frightened, fragmented manner, the girl described how a large man had grabbed her neck, making it hard for her to breathe. Fortunately, something caused him to stop. This miraculous rescue also helped police gather crucial information. Initially, the girls were too scared to talk freely to detectives, but over time, they revealed that the criminal had attempted to strangle both of them when he took them away to a remote location. Witnesses had a clear memory of the attacker and provided a description that closely resembled Michael Klunder. Following this, he was arrested and charged with kidnapping and harming children. In Iowa, kidnapping can result in a life sentence, and his previous criminal history raised concerns. Michael was genuinely shocked when detectives returned to his home to read him his rights. During the hearing, his lawyer argued for a lighter sentence. Michael was convicted of third-degree kidnapping, but the assault charge was reduced since no one died in the incident and the choking was considered less severe. He received a 2-year sentence for causing bodily harm and a 10-year sentence for each count of third-degree kidnapping. The jury reached their verdict quickly. By the time he was incarcerated, another crime had been solved just 5 months later, revealing that he had also been involved in other kidnapping incidents that he had not disclosed. Fortunately, those incidents did not lead to any fatalities. Ultimately, the court sentenced him to over 30 years in prison, to be served consecutively, with no possibility of parole. His lawyer continued to argue that instead of prison, Michael needed rehabilitation and support for reintegration into society. There was some merit to this argument, as Michael's behavior during his first arrest was concerning. He appeared detached and indifferent when speaking with police. After Michael confessed, he was asked why he felt it was necessary to kidnap his victims. He couldn't provide a solid explanation and later claimed it was due to having a bad day. It's unclear what behaviors might lead to leniency in prison, but Michael was released in 2011 after serving only 20 years. However, this was followed by another probation period, which he failed to complete. Before he could fully adjust to being free, he began to act out again, leading to a more tragic outcome. This time, Michael kidnapped Kathleen and Detsy. Detsy was rescued by accident, but the search for Kathleen continues. This incident increased the total number of confirmed victims of Michael to 7, most of whom were minors. However, the actual number could be greater. In 1992, Michael lived in another state where he committed additional crimes, including the kidnapping of an 18-year-old girl named Lori Lee Smith, whom he lured with his car. At the time, Lori was driving home on a quiet country road late at night. Suddenly, she noticed someone behind her flashing their headlights and signaling her to stop. Believing it was an emergency, Lori pulled over and rolled down her window. Michael then approached her vehicle, claiming that her taillights were out and offering to help check them. Unaware of the danger, Lori got out of her car. As soon as Lori reached the side of the trunk, Michael pulled out a knife and threatened her. He tried to lure her into his car, but Lori was brave and fiercely resisted him. They struggled inside Michael's vehicle until a passing truck interrupted them. It's important to note that Michael typically kept his victims alive until the last moment, with the exception of Kathleen. After Michael was released in 2011 and before he kidnapped Kathleen and Detsy in 2013, there was a significant period during which his actions went unaccounted for. This gap raised concerns and warranted further investigation to determine if there were other victims or crimes that had not yet been discovered. During this time, Michael had plenty of opportunities to commit more crimes, and there were few signs that he intended to change his ways. It was believed that he could have committed many similar offenses, some of which might have resulted in deaths. His victims were often saved by sheer luck or unexpected circumstances. There could be other unresolved kidnappings and murders linked to him. For example, he was suspected of being involved in the disappearances of two 8-year-old girls in 2012, Leary Cook Morrissey and Elizabeth Collins from Evansdale, Iowa. However, proving a connection to these cases was not possible. At the time of Leary and Elizabeth's observation, Michael's phone was detected in a different location, which cleared him of suspicion. This case remains unsolved, and the fate of 15-year-old Kathleen is still uncertain. Detectives are analyzing the information and investigating the final days of Michael's life. Interestingly, he appeared to be maintaining a normal life. He had a steady job, purchased a house, and was married to a woman named Lisa, who also came from a small town. Michael preferred small towns because children there tend to be more trusting, many homes are often left unlocked, and it can be easier for criminals to operate. Michael was fortunate not only in finding victims but also in eluding detection. Even though he should have been registered as an abuse offender and was under constant watch by the authorities, Lisa was completely unaware of his past. As a result, detectives decided to search their home first. On February 25, 2013, law enforcement officers spoke with neighbors to see if anyone had seen Kathleen, but no one recognized her photo. Lisa, who listened in shock to the revelations from the police about her husband, felt overwhelmed and was unable to provide any useful information to the investigator. Around this time, 12-year-old Detsy had regained her composure. She spoke with the detectives and later participated in several interviews, which helped them piece together the details of her escape. Detectives searched the barn but did not find Kathleen there. Hopes for her safe return quickly faded when bloodstains found in Michael's car were matched to her DNA. The circumstances surrounding Kathleen remained unclear, but they were able to make some predictions about Michael's behavior. When he returned and discovered that Detsy had escaped and taken his weapon with her, he concluded that it was all over for him and took his own life. Michael likely feared returning to prison, knowing that other inmates would have treated him terribly for his crimes against children. Something terrible must have happened to Kathleen, leading him to choose death over life in prison. Even after Detsy's escape, there were still no updates about Kathleen. The search continued, and in those initial days, they discovered the girls' backpacks, which Michael had left behind in the forest. Kathleen Shepard's fate was discovered 2 weeks later when a body was found in the river, a few kilometers from her hometown. Unfortunately, her body's condition had deteriorated, making identification difficult. Eventually, it was confirmed that the body belonged to Kathleen Shepard. Investigators found signs of sharp objects on her body and the same bindings used to restrain Detsy. In this way, Kathleen became Michael's last victim. This situation raises questions regarding Michael as an individual. In light of these events, the public expressed outrage towards law enforcement, accusing them of protecting dangerous criminals more than the victims. Interestingly, Lisa, Michael's wife, was one of the few who genuinely mourned him. Could she have been the only person to see some humanity in him that could inspire affection? Or was her seeming affection a result of her husband's manipulative behavior? Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry was born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, a small town in the United States. As the youngest of 10 children, her parents faced great challenges in providing for their large family. In difficult circumstances, Crystal and her siblings grew up quite independently, with her parents being too busy to look after all the children. Fortunately, Crystal's older sister, who was only 12 years old when Crystal was born, took on the role of mother and looked after her younger brothers and sisters. Growing up in such a difficult environment, they all wanted to start their own lives as soon as possible, so her siblings lived in different cities and states. Crystal also dreamed of starting a family. While in high school, she met Tom and they eventually got married. Initially, they moved to California, but Crystal soon realized that city life was not for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine and settled in Bridgeton, a small town about an hour away from Crystal's hometown. The quaint town is famous for being the setting of Stephen King's novel, The Mist. Crystal worked at a local shoe store, while Tom held various part-time jobs. Later, Crystal found out she was pregnant and they welcomed their daughter, Sarah. Although Tom initially wanted to be a father, his relationship with Crystal became complicated after their daughter was born. He began spending more and more time at a local bar, wasting almost all of their money on alcohol. At one point, he even took all of Crystal's savings to buy groceries, leaving them without food. The financial burden of Tom's drinking problem became too much for their relationship, and Crystal eventually decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom still visited his daughter occasionally, but he was not actively involved in her life. The situation became worse when Tom started dating someone new and his girlfriend began harassing Crystal, constantly calling and threatening her, visiting her house and causing chaos in public, all because she could not accept Crystal's previous marriage to Tom. Crystal was hesitant about Sarah visiting her father because she was worried that his new girlfriend could endanger Sarah's safety. After her parents' divorce, Crystal moved in with her mother. She spent years saving money, and finally, she was able to buy her own house. The house was located in the suburb of Bridgeton, near a peaceful lake and a forest. Crystal and Sarah were delighted to finally have a place they could call their own. Crystal grew up in a large family, so when she had her own daughter, she gave her as much time, attention, and love as she could. After a long day at work, Crystal and her daughter, Sarah, would often rent a movie or just talk for hours. One evening, on May 10, 1994, when Crystal was 30 and Sarah was 12, they watched the solar eclipse together. The next day went as usual. Crystal went to work and Sarah went to school. That evening, they had dinner and Crystal put Sarah to bed. A few hours later, Sarah woke to the sound of her mother screaming. At first, she thought Crystal was on the phone, arguing with someone. However, she quickly realized the situation was much more serious. Crystal's screams were loud and frantic, making Sarah think someone was attacking her mother. With the bedroom door ajar, Sarah mustered up the courage to approach, despite her mounting fear. She moved closer to the door, and as she listened, she realized the scream was coming from the kitchen. However, from where she stood, Sarah couldn't see what was happening. Sarah was terrified, not daring to move or make a sound, afraid of revealing her location. Then she heard footsteps, and her heart sank as she assumed that her mother's attacker was now coming for her. In a desperate attempt to escape, she hid behind the bed and waited anxiously for the door to open. However, instead of the door, she heard the sound of a kitchen drawer sliding open, followed by the sound of someone rummaging through utensils. Her mother's continuous screams and desperate pleas for forgiveness filled the house, and in the next few seconds, Sarah heard what sounded like someone had started stabbing her mother with a knife. With each brutal stab, her mother's cries grew fainter and fainter until they strangely stopped. Gathering her courage, Sarah finally left the room and went to the kitchen. What she saw was a horrifying sight. The only light came from the moon shining through the window, as the kitchen lights were off. The clock on the wall read 1 a.m. When she entered the kitchen, she saw her mother lying on the floor in a large pool of blood that covered the entire floor. Despite her shock, Sarah knew she had to call for help immediately. Next to her mother's hand was a phone. Sarah quickly picked up the phone and dialed 911, but she only received complete silence on the other end of the line. She then ran to Crystal's room to try the second phone. But unfortunately, it didn't work either. Despite trying several times and getting the same result, Sarah realized that she had only one option left: to seek help from the neighbors. Braving the cold of the May night in only her pajamas and bare feet, Sarah ran out of the house and into the street. Her main concern was to find someone to help her injured mother. She started running to the nearest house, about half a mile away, towards the center of the city. However, when she knocked repeatedly, no one answered. Undeterred, Sarah continued to run to other nearby houses, knocking on each door, but still no one answered. Finally, after several attempts at many houses, Sarah arrived at a local Italian restaurant, whose owner lived in the adjacent building. She knocked desperately and finally got an answer. The owner, shocked by Sarah's panicked state, let her in and listened as she explained the urgency of the situation. Her mother had been attacked and she desperately needed help. Sarah then called 911 herself and reported what had happened. The police immediately arrived at their home. When they examined the front door glass, they discovered a fingerprint, which they quickly identified as Sarah's. A thorough search of the crime scene found no other fingerprints. However, the kitchen floor revealed several bloody shoe prints. Police took photographs to determine the size and style of the shoes, suspecting they belonged to the killer. The shoe prints led to Sarah's bedroom but mysteriously stopped at the entrance, as if the killer had returned without entering the room. Police noticed two unusual details at the crime scene. It was clear that the killer had tried to wipe some of the blood off the floor. However, it was clear that the killer could not remove all of the blood, as there was blood everywhere. However, there were also other drops that fell to the floor at right angles, and judging by the splatters from a greater height, the police speculated that the killer had injured himself during the murder, and that the blood was theirs. This theory was reinforced by the discovery of a trail of blood leading to a roll of tissue paper, but there were no remaining rolls nearby. It is possible that the killer used the tissue paper to stop the bleeding after being injured during the murder, and then immediately left the crime scene. Medical experts discovered more than 50 stab wounds on Crystal's body, indicating that this was a violent and intentional attack. The murder weapon, later determined to be a kitchen knife, was not found at the scene, suggesting that the killer had taken it with them when they left. During this process, a piece of the knife broke off and was embedded in Crystal's body, further highlighting the force used. Additional testing revealed that Crystal had been sexually assaulted, allowing experts to collect DNA and blood samples from the perpetrator. Despite this crucial evidence, the investigation was plagued by unexpected delays. Due to a lack of funding, the local lab was overwhelmed, so it would take at least 6 months to get the results. This forced the police to begin their investigation without any concrete evidence. Initially, the police ruled out a robbery, as nothing appeared to have been missing from the house. They also noted that there were no signs of forced entry, leading them to conclude that the perpetrator was likely someone Crystal knew, as she likely opened the door for them. Since she was wearing pajamas at the time of the incident, it is unlikely that she was waiting for guests, leading police to speculate about a potential relationship between Crystal and her attacker. The police have two main theories about the case. Crystal knew the killer and let them in willingly, or the killer was a stranger who knocked on the door and tricked Crystal into opening the door. To gather more information, the police decide to start by questioning the only witness, Sarah. At the hospital, where Sarah is being checked, the police ask her why she ran to a neighbor's house for help instead of calling 911 from her own home. Sarah explains that she couldn't use her phone because it wasn't working, but the investigation finds this explanation suspicious, as both Sarah's and Crystal's phones were working properly when checked by the police at the crime scene. Police believe Sarah may have become confused due to the stress of the situation. Initially, they considered the possibility that the first phone was inoperable, as the first caller had turned off her phone and needed to reset it to make another call. As for the second phone, they did not rule out the possibility that Sarah may have dialed the wrong number in her haste or that the phone line may have been temporarily disconnected due to the rain. As the investigation continued, the police asked Sarah if she had seen the killer. Sarah replied that she had been in her bedroom during the incident. However, the police were a little skeptical of her story and asked how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife. Sarah's explanation was that it was obvious. But the police continued to press her. They felt that she might be withholding some information and that she had actually seen the killer. In the 3 days after the murder, the police interviewed Sarah 18 times. They hoped her story would change, but she stuck to her original account of events. Then the police found their first important clue. A local shoe store had a pair of boots with soles that matched the bloody footprints found at the scene. They also discovered that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, the girlfriend of her ex-husband Tom. Although the killer was clearly a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa because she had repeatedly threatened to kill Crystal. Teresa may have had someone help her commit the crime, but the police did not find any evidence to support this idea. During their investigation, they discovered that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years before Dennis started working at the shoe store where Crystal worked. They began dating soon after and eventually became engaged, although they never married. The police found that their relationship was strained, with frequent arguments between the couple and Dennis sometimes engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking things and punching walls. However, the police did not find any evidence that he had ever harmed Crystal. The day after the murder, the police came to Dennis's house. When he opened the door, they asked him if he had left the night before or if he had seen Crystal. Dennis immediately responded by asking if Crystal was dead, and he passed out shortly after. After regaining consciousness, Dennis began answering the police's questions. He explained that he had originally planned to visit Crystal that evening, but he had been late for work because he had helped a friend fix his car. When he finally returned home, he called Crystal, but she told him it was too late to visit. This led to an argument and Dennis stayed home. Although the police could not be 100% sure that he was telling the truth, they were able to verify that he had helped his friend fix his car that evening. Dennis also voluntarily took a lie detector test, which the police found no signs of lying. Although the police noticed that he had the same shoe size as the killer, they did not find any matching shoes in Dennis's home. He agreed to provide a DNA sample, but he asked the police to do him a favor, saying that if they decided to arrest him, they should enter his workplace through the back door to avoid disturbing others. He explained that his boss had always treated him well and he did not want to disrupt work. During the investigation, the police contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town. This friend shared a disturbing conversation she had had with Crystal just a few weeks earlier. In the story, Crystal expressed fear for Dennis. Their arguments escalated and Dennis became increasingly aggressive. Crystal considered ending the relationship but hesitated for fear of Dennis's reaction. The police then went to Crystal's workplace to further question her coworkers. but were unable to gather any useful information. As soon as the police left Crystal's workplace, Dennis entered and began asking what the co-workers had told the police. Despite the police's efforts, no evidence was found to implicate Dennis, and had to wait months for the DNA results, so they continued to search for other potential leads. This led them to a local man named Donnie, who had gotten drunk at a party and started bragging about killing Crystal. During the investigation, police brought Donnie in for questioning. However, the man claimed that he had no memory of attending a party and denied any involvement in the murder. Police later discovered that Donnie was an alcoholic and a notorious liar. In another development, a witness reported seeing a black pickup truck with New Hampshire plates near Crystal's neighborhood, but this lead ultimately went unanswered. Another witness came forward describing an incident in which she drove past Crystal's house on the night of the murder. She recalled hearing sirens, assuming they were related to her boyfriend, who lived down the street and was a frequent troublemaker. At the same time, she saw a car with headlights following her at high speed. Thinking that the driver was chasing her, she turned onto another street. However, the car passed her. Police have not been able to confirm whether the car was related to Crystal's murder. The investigation is still ongoing, and they have had difficulty finding any concrete evidence. In an effort to get the case back on track, Crystal's family has offered a $10,000 reward for any information and has posted flyers around town to attract potential witnesses. However, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, Teresa, has been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers. Crystal's ex-husband, Tom, was investigated thoroughly, but police eventually ruled him out as a suspect. He was an alcoholic and had become worse over the years, leaving him almost drunk. In this state, it seemed impossible for him to commit such a crime, and he had no apparent motive. The police investigated two other men Crystal had dated after her divorce, but found no connection between them and the crime. All the men, including Tom, provided DNA samples. The police waited for the test results, which took 9 months. When they did, they showed that the blood and semen samples did not match any of the suspects, including Dennis. With no new leads, the police requested a DNA sample from Dennis again for further testing, but the results remained the same. With no progress, they decided to re-interview their only witness, Sarah. They still believed that she was lying to them, or that her mind had blocked out the horrific memories of her mother's murder and that she had actually seen the killer. To investigate further, they traveled to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt, and took a polygraph test. The results showed no deception on Sarah's part. However, the police continued to interrogate her over and over again, asking the same questions. But she repeatedly insisted that she had not seen the killer. Ultimately, the case remained unsolved for years, with police continuing to interview witnesses and potential suspects, but without any significant breakthroughs. In the late 1990s, the FBI DNA database became available, allowing police to upload a DNA sample of Crystal's killer. However, no match was found. A new police officer took over the case in 1999, determined to review all the available evidence and collect more DNA samples from men in the town and surrounding areas. Advances in laboratory technology allowed for faster testing, and hundreds of samples were collected. Unfortunately, none of these samples matched the killer's DNA. The police also asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to explore the possibility of recovering repressed memories of the crime. Sarah agreed, but the psychologist concluded that her claim of not seeing the perpetrator was true and that she had not actually repressed any memories. Years passed, and despite the police's continued efforts, the case remained unsolved due to a lack of new leads. The case took a surprising turn in 2006 when police received news of a DNA match. A DNA sample entered into an FBI database matched blood and semen found at Crystal's crime scene. The DNA belonged to Michael Hutchinson, a man who had never been investigated or suspected in the case. Further investigation revealed that in 2003, Michael had been arrested and convicted of assault with a weapon, resulting in a 6-month prison sentence followed by 3 years of probation, during which time his DNA was collected. A DNA sample from Michael was initially collected but not uploaded to the FBI database and remained on file at the lab. Years later, Michael was arrested for driving drunk with a child in the car. After being released on bail, he failed to appear in court and was subsequently sent to jail. On the day of his wedding, Michael was arrested and taken into custody. A new DNA sample was taken from him, and this time, it was uploaded to the database immediately. Soon after, the police on Crystal's case received a match. They informed Sarah of the development but asked her to keep it a secret until formal charges were filed. The police also asked Sarah if she knew the suspect, and she said no. With Michael in custody, the police began to slowly build their case to ensure that the suspect had no chance of escaping punishment. They discovered that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's home. Michael was 19 and lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. Since Michael frequently visited his mother's house, just a short distance from Crystal's home, the police suspected that Michael may have seen Crystal on several occasions. The police visited Michael in prison and asked him about the murder, but Michael denied any involvement and claimed that he did not know Crystal. However, the police were skeptical of Michael's story, as his DNA was found on Crystal's body and his blood was found at the crime scene. While in custody, the police made an interesting observation about Michael. He had a large scar on the palm of his hand, which appeared to match the wound that Crystal's killer may have suffered during the murder. Although the scar alone was not enough to prove Michael guilty in court, the presence of his DNA firmly linked him to the crime. He was later charged with murder. The prosecution presented evidence that Michael, a user of illegal drugs, had frequently passed by Crystal's house, and that on the fateful night he decided to attack her. But he refused to plead guilty, so it is impossible to know how it all happened. But with the evidence available, the outcome was clear: Michael attacked and killed Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was also sought for the killer not leaving any fingerprints at the crime scene, as Michael worked as a bricklayer. Over time, people who do this work often have worn and torn patterns on their palms, making it impossible for them to leave fingerprints on the surface. In his testimony, Michael stated that he met Crystal at a bar and they went back to her place, where they had consensual sex. A man in a black motorcycle jacket broke into the house, attacked Michael, and killed Crystal. Michael regained consciousness and tried to fight off the attacker, but he was injured in the hand and the attacker escaped. However, Michael then left the crime scene without a valid reason, which raised doubts about his story. There were several inconsistencies, including the fact that the only shoe prints at the scene were Michael's, suggesting that if his testimony was true, the intruder would have had to remove his shoes before entering, which is highly unlikely. Additionally, there were no other signs of a break-in or struggle at the scene. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with a guilty verdict for Michael. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael remains incarcerated to this day. The traumatic event of her mother's murder had a profound impact on Sarah. However, over time, she found the strength to rebuild her life. Sarah pursued further education, pursued a writing career, and eventually published a book chronicling her mother's murder, compiling all the available information. Furthermore, while writing the book, Sarah discovered new facts about the case that the police had overlooked. She discovered that Michael often borrowed his father's car, a black Ford pickup with New Hampshire license plates. This information was important because a witness had previously reported seeing a similar car near Crystal's house on the night of the murder. Another witness also reported seeing a car with its high beams speeding past her house that night. She initially thought the police were headed for her boyfriend's house because she mistook the sirens of an ambulance for police sirens. The woman's boyfriend was revealed to be Michael. The police had recorded his name and address in the report. However, they did not investigate him further at that time. Had the police investigated him further, they might have discovered the cut on his hand, potentially solving the case sooner. Unfortunately, past events cannot be changed. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Kathleen Volbeke. Australia's most notorious female serial killer was recently released after questions about her guilt emerged, but she still spent 2 decades in prison. Kathleen Volbeke was born in 1967 in Western Sydney. Her life was challenging from the start, as her mother chose to leave her violent husband, who had a criminal background. This man had a history that included a knife attack, though the victim survived. It remains unclear if Kathleen experienced domestic violence or abuse from her father, but her mother was murdered by him. After her mother left the abusive relationship, her husband tracked her down and stabbed her 24 times, resulting in her death. He received a 15-year prison sentence for this crime. At the time, young Kathleen was just 18 months old and had already lost both parents. Kathleen was raised by a family in Newcastle. She had an older sister, Leah. As a child, Kathleen discovered that her parents had actually adopted her, which left her deeply upset. At school, she had friends who understood her difficult situation and supported her as much as they could. However, her adoptive parents were strict and controlling, often punishing her, which created further problems for the 16-year-old. A staff member informed her that she was not legally adopted. She had only been taken out of state temporarily, meaning she was still in state care. Kathleen began to worry that her new parents were not going to finalize the adoption because they did not love her enough. She felt a lack of love and affection from them, especially when compared to the affection they had for their biological daughter. These feelings were further intensified by the hardships of her teenage years. Even her supportive friends had to deal with the negativity and depression she was experiencing during this time. As a result, Kathleen became curious about her biological parents to understand why they had abandoned her. She soon learned that her biological father had murdered her mother and was sentenced to a long prison term. This shocked her deeply. The situation was made worse by the fact that it was the 1980s, a time when people rarely sought help from psychologists or psychiatrists for personal issues. Instead of reaching out for support, the girl kept her feelings to herself and seldom talked about them, even with her closest friends. After finishing school, Kathleen chose to leave her foster home and move in with her friend Billy Joe, who lived with his mother. This change took place in 1985, marking the beginning of her adulthood. One night, she and Billy Joe went to a disco where she met Skryg Volbeke, a 24-year-old employee at a mining company. He was kind and caring, making Kathleen feel confident, calm, and protected. They enjoyed each other's company, loved to dance, and their relationship quickly grew deeper. That same year, they decided to move in together, and it seemed like their relationship was perfect. 2 years later, the couple married in a simple ceremony. A year later, Kathleen became pregnant. In 1989, they welcomed their first child, a healthy baby boy named Caleb. However, he had a small defect in his larynx that made it difficult for him to breathe when his mouth was closed, causing him to breathe heavily and loudly. Kathleen, who had grown up without parents, was determined to be a good mother. She cared for Caleb with love and care, especially given his condition, and she kept constant tabs on him. Sadly, her efforts were not enough. Just 19 days after his birth, Kathleen found Caleb dead in his crib. His death was a devastating blow to both parents. Doctors examined the child and determined he was a victim of sudden infant death syndrome. Affects infants under 1 year of age and can lead to sudden death without an identifiable cause. The investigation found no indications of foul play. Despite their heartbreak, the couple chose to try for another child. A year later, on June 3, 1990, they welcomed their son Patrick. For several months, he thrived and developed normally, with no signs of issues. However, on the night of October 18th, Kathleen heard a cry from the children's bedroom. Her husband rushed to the room and discovered Patrick in his crib, appearing blue. Kathleen was by the crib, screaming and crying in fear. The man administered CPR while Kathleen called for an ambulance, which arrived quickly. Thankfully, Patrick was still alive and was taken to the hospital for urgent care. There, doctors diagnosed him with epilepsy. Fortunately, Patrick was saved and later discharged. For a while, everything was calm, but in February 1991, another seizure occurred while Skryg, the child's father, was at work. His wife, Kathleen, called him in tears. She said the child had had another seizure and could not be saved. The grieving couple then decided to move away from Newcastle to start a new life elsewhere. They moved to the small town of Metland, a population of less than 2,000 people, about a 40-minute drive from their old home. Despite their past tragedies, they remained hopeful and continued trying for children, dreaming of a large family. Eventually, they welcomed their next daughter, Sarah. Sadly, she suffered from the same respiratory problems as their first child, Caleb. Her parents devoted themselves to her care and treatment, but despite their best efforts, Sarah was found dead in her bed on August 29, 1992, just 10 months after her birth. This loss was another devastating blow to them. Kathleen was deeply saddened by the misfortunes that had befallen her children. Frequent arguments between her and her husband had become a daily occurrence. Although they had decided to live separately, they had not yet filed for divorce. Kathleen repeatedly blamed herself for the deaths of her children, believing that she had failed to pay attention, missing important signs that could have helped them. She was devastated. At the time, there was no technology that could analyze the situation and identify any underlying problems. Doctors were baffled, declaring the children's deaths to be simply a series of tragic accidents. After a short separation, they got back together. They reunited and decided to move to a new home in Singleton, a town of about 5,000 people, not far from where they had lived. Their relationship improved, the challenges brought them closer together, and they became a stronger couple. They supported each other and continued to dream of having children. In late 1996, Kathleen became pregnant with their fourth child, 3 years after losing their daughter Sarah. Laura was born on August 7, 1997, and a year later the family celebrated her first birthday. The girl had no idea how significant this event was for her parents, especially given the sad history of sudden infant death syndrome affecting their previous children. The first year was especially difficult for them. They believed they could finally move past this challenging time. The arrival of their daughter helped improve their relationship. Kathleen and Skryg were able to enjoy being parents. After enduring a tough decade of marriage, they thought things were finally on track. Sadly, just 6 months after their daughter's first birthday, Kathleen discovered Laura unresponsive. She called for an ambulance, but the doctors could not save the baby. The medical examiner who performed an autopsy on Laura was unable to determine the cause of death. While investigating the circumstances of Laura's death, it was discovered that Kathleen's other children had also died as infants and all had the same diagnosis, asphyxia, related to heart problems. However, medical experts were unable to piece together all the relevant information due to the lack of available data. The Kathleen family's life would never be the same after these events. In 1999, an anonymous person reported the circumstances surrounding the family to the police, stating that all of Kathleen's children had died mysteriously. The police received information and started investigating the family. They spoke with Skryg Falbik to gather details and express suspicions about the mother, who was always present when the children died suddenly and without explanation. After this conversation, the husband became suspicious of his wife upon learning about the investigation. He gave the police her personal belongings, including her diaries, which the police began to examine closely. These documents later became crucial to the case. Tensions within the family grew, and the husband started blaming his wife for the children's deaths. The following year, the couple split up. The police, after thoroughly reviewing all the case materials, suspected that the biological mother may have harmed her children. The Kathleen had lost a total of 4 babies. However, these suspicions alone were not enough for an arrest. They needed solid evidence, which they worked diligently to gather. A year after her separation from her husband, Kathleen was arrested on suspicion of murdering her 4 children. She denied the charges, claiming that they had all died from natural causes, but police believed she was being untruthful. She was eventually found guilty of 3 counts of premeditated murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The jury trial began in 2003. The prosecution argued that Kathleen strangled all 4 of her children, claiming it was the result of anger or stress related to postnatal depression. They said she had difficulty caring for her newborns, overwhelmed by sleepless nights and the constant crying of her children. In this distressed state, the prosecution claimed she made the decision to harm her children, which allegedly happened 4 times. However, no specific evidence of abuse was presented. The children were raised in a loving family environment where they were well cared for, always neatly dressed, and well fed. The bodies showed no signs of injury, such as abrasions or bruises, nor were there any indications of a struggle or acts of cruelty. The prosecution highlighted that Kathleen consistently discovered her deceased children, which increased suspicion. Kathleen was the last person to see the children alive, which raised suspicions. The prosecution found this coincidence hard to believe. In response, the defense argued that the Kathleen was a housewife who spent all her time at home. In fact, she was the only person consistently with the children while her husband was at work. Therefore, it was natural for her to be the one to find them. The children died from sudden infant death syndrome, and this happened 4 times in a row. During the court proceedings, the Kathleen remained composed and showed little emotion. She made brief statements, explaining that she did her best to care for the children and often struggled to sleep at night. However, whenever she managed to fall asleep or became distracted, a tragedy occurred. Kathleen maintained that she could never have harmed her children. Her calm demeanor throughout the trial was portrayed by the media as indifferent and without guilt for her actions. Kathleen's diary entries significantly influenced the verdict, but only selected excerpts were presented in court, in which she wrote, "I was so frustrated with myself, angry and sad after losing my temper, and I felt like the worst mother in the world. I was afraid she would abandon me like Sarah," referring to her feelings about her daughter Laura. While these statements expressed her self-blame, they did not explicitly admit guilt or describe the events leading up to her death. Despite this, her diary entries were interpreted only negatively, suggesting that she felt responsible for her children's deaths, although she did not admit to killing them. These records were not reviewed by psychologists or other experts who could have provided a more accurate interpretation. The prosecution strategically influenced the jury by reading brief excerpts while neglecting to mention that these were personal records of a woman mourning the loss of 4 children. The media's negative portrayal and the prosecutor's diary entries fostered doubts about the defendant. Additionally, the prosecutor referred to Meadows' Law, which consists of 3 rules established by a renowned British pediatrician, Roy Meadow. He stated that the death of a single baby is a tragedy, 2 deaths raise suspicion, and 3 are considered murder unless proven otherwise. In this case, there were 4 deaths. Caleb, the first child, died in 1989. This was followed by Patrick, who passed away in 1991 at just 8 months old due to epileptic seizures. Sarah died at night in 1993 when she was 10 months old. Laura, the last of the children, lived the longest, dying in 1999 at 18 months. Initially, the Kathleen was considered a villain in the trial, with experts from various medical fields involved. They stated that sudden infant death syndrome can theoretically occur in one family, but the chances of this happening are very low. At that time, no one accepted responsibility for the tragic deaths. Were these events a coincidence in the Kathleen family? The numerous allegations contributed to the eventual guilty verdict. The case gained significant public attention and led to multiple trials across the country, where other mothers were also accused of causing their children's deaths due to sudden infant death syndrome. These women denied the allegations but were unable to prove their innocence, resulting in their arrest and facing intense scrutiny from prosecutors. Prosecutors even looked into Kathleen's past, which included a troubled childhood and a father in prison for killing his mother, which showed a penchant for violence. And the incriminating evidence against Kathleen came from her ex-husband, Skryg Falbik, who testified against her in court. She felt deeply betrayed by his testimony, as he believed at the time that she was responsible for the deaths of their children. In May 2003, after a 7-week trial, Catherine Volpig was convicted of 3 counts of murder and causing serious harm to her first son. When the verdict was read, she broke down in tears, overwhelmed with despair. Catherine believed she was innocent and did not expect to be found guilty. The media widely covered the case, portraying it as a triumph over one of Australia's most notorious female serial killers. Public sentiment towards Kathleen was extremely negative. She was widely hated. She received a 40-year prison sentence but could apply for parole after 30 years. Unsatisfied with her sentence, she appealed, leading to a review in 2005, which reduced her sentence to 30 years with early parole eligibility. After 25 years in prison, Kathleen faced hardship. She was treated with contempt and violence. Fortunately, Kathleen had friends who visited her regularly and believed she was innocent. Refusing to give up, she sought to overturn her conviction, filing an appeal and working with her attorneys from California, who brought in experts and new findings related to child mortality that could support her case. After 12 years in prison, in 2015, there was good reason to believe Kathleen was innocent. Several forensic experts reviewed the case documents and concluded that the children's deaths were due to natural causes. This new evidence prompted further investigations in 2018. Kathleen was ultimately left alone during the investigation. She spoke out to defend herself against the false accusations stemming from her diary entries. Kathleen explained that writing in her diary was her way of coping with life's challenges, and it provided her with relief. Doctors believed that the deaths of 4 babies in a couple suffering from phobias could be linked to a genetic mutation inherited from their parents. However, the scientific techniques available at that time were not reliable enough to confirm this, and mere words were insufficient. In 2020, an immunology professor from the Department of Genetic Medicine at the Australian National University joined the investigation. He initiated a global study into the situation faced by the defendant. Rare abnormalities related to genetic mutations were identified, leading to birth defects in Kathleen's children. Doctors confirmed that all 4 children in Kathleen's family had these rare mutations, which caused fatal seizures. The condition was determined to be a genetic abnormality, and there were no signs of violent death in these cases. In 2021, a group of prominent scientists from different areas of medicine, active in the 1990s, signed a petition in support of Kathleen, strongly asserting her innocence. They appealed to law enforcement, emphasizing Kathleen's innocence and referencing recent scientific discoveries and research that were unavailable at the time she was wrongly convicted. A new investigation was initiated by the end of 2022 and concluded in April 2023. Throughout this investigation, new evidence was gathered and submitted for review. During the same period, Kathleen's diaries were re-examined by experts in psychology and psychiatry. After reviewing the entries, they concluded that the diaries did not contain confessions. Instead, they reflected Kathleen's internal struggles, including her fears, anxiety, and grief related to post-traumatic stress. Forensic experts, who had investigated numerous infant murders, raised doubts about the possibility of strangling a child without leaving any evidence. As a result of these findings, the prosecutor's office was persuaded to reconsider the case's sentence and punishment. This new information sparked significant public outrage. Some people continued to believe in Kathleen's guilt and argued that she deserved to be in prison, while others were furious, questioning why an innocent woman had spent 20 years behind bars. On June 5, 2023, Kathleen Volbig was pardoned after serving 20 years of a prison sentence that was originally intended to last at least 25 years. This pardon allowed her to appeal to the Court of Appeal for criminal cases, which could provide her with financial compensation for the years she lost. However, she still faces the lasting effects of media coverage that has turned her case into a phenomenon known as Kathleen phobia, causing her to face hostility from strangers. Financial compensation cannot make up for the time she spent alone in prison, alongside dangerous criminals, nor can it erase the humiliation and betrayal she experienced. Her life has truly been a nightmare. Kathleen is now 56 years old and continues to persevere despite everything. If her children had lived, her firstborn, Caleb, would be 34 years old, and her youngest daughter, Laura, would be 25. They might have had children of their own, allowing Kathleen to become a grandmother. Sadly, she has not had the chance to enjoy those joys in life. Currently, forensic medicine experts are debating the validity of the law of Meadows, arguing that it is fundamentally flawed. Many women have suffered as a result of this law and were acquitted later on. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Cynthia George. On an afternoon on June 16, 2001, an attack at a gas station in Akron, Ohio, shattered the peaceful atmosphere and claimed the life of a successful businessman once admired by the upper class. Ed George and Cynthia George were famous residents and were considered the wealthiest in the state of Agaya, USA. Ed was a successful Lebanese businessman who owned a banquet hall and a nightclub. He was one of 8 children in a Lebanese Catholic family. After completing his education at the University of Michigan, he joined the family business founded by his father, Edwin George, in 1948. Although the original building was destroyed by fire, Ed rebuilt it and expanded the venue to include an entertainment center for events. During its peak, the establishment hosted renowned musical acts. Cynthia George, Ed's wife, was a charming and attractive socialite, known for her petite frame, blonde hair, and striking blue eyes. They had 7 children together. Cynthia grew up in North Canton in a low-income family. Her father worked as a miner, and her mother took care of the home and children. Lacking exposure to wealth, Cynthia began working at a young age. Although she couldn't afford higher education, she quickly realized that her looks could provide her with a path to a more comfortable life, leading her to pursue a career as a dancer. At this time, Cynthia, a 20-year-old, attended a nightclub casting call in 1978, managed by Ed, who was 15 years her senior. Although she didn't get the job, she caught Ed's attention, and they began dating. He seemed to be a convinced Catholic and was in no hurry to get married. However, after 6 years together, they got married in a lavish ceremony, attended by over 500 guests. This marriage fulfilled Cynthia's dream of a luxurious lifestyle. Cynthia and Ed moved into a spacious mansion with 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. First of all, they wanted children, and over the next few years, Cynthia gave birth to 4 daughters. Ed felt this wasn't enough, so they adopted 2 boys. In 1994, at the age of 40, Cynthia became pregnant again and had another girl. The family comfortably managed their large household with the help of servants and a steady income from an upscale restaurant at the club. Despite his busy work schedule, Ed always made time for his children. He would comb his daughter's hair every morning, assist with their homework in the evenings. Being a person with a healthy lifestyle, he is never absent from any sporting event. Meanwhile, Cynthia relies heavily on nannies to take care of her children and enjoys a leisurely life of partying and shopping. Her husband supported this lifestyle, giving her plenty of freedom. While his substantial wealth, Cynthia often complained about receiving too little money, even though she indulged in whatever she wanted. In fact, Cynthia turned out to be not such a decent woman as she initially seemed. From the first years of marriage, she had lovers that her husband did not suspect. She flirted and met different men right in his club. One of her main lovers was Jeff Zach, a tall and charming man known for his appeal to women. He had Israeli roots. By 1976, he dropped out of school and decided to move to his homeland to study his Jewish origins. He became a citizen of Israel and even served in the army as a paratrooper. Jeff was multilingual and claimed to be a special agent involved in real combat operations. After 3 years, he returned to the United States. At 29, he met a beautiful brunette named Bonnie Cook in an Arizona restaurant. They quickly fell in love, decided to solidify their union by marriage, and then have children. During this time, Bonnie discovered a different side of her husband. She noticed that Jeff seemed to have 2 contrasting personalities. One was calm and gentle, while the other was aggressive and cruel. These personalities appear unpredictably. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed a son. During this period, Jeff attempted to start a new business. He had many different startup ideas, but none were successful. They managed to make ends meet and moved into a comfortable 2-story house in the small town of Stowe, Agaya. Here, Jeff began a business involving vending machines. Although he became somewhat calmer over time, he still frequently experienced angry outbursts. His violent nature even led to several legal issues. Shortly after moving in one evening, Bonnie and Jeff were dining at Ed's club when Bonnie noticed her husband staring intently at a beautiful stranger. During dinner, Jeff even complimented the blonde multiple times, which greatly upset Bonnie. This attractive woman was Cynthia. That night, Jeff also met Ed, the owner of the club, and realized that building a friendship with him could significantly benefit his business. He spent the rest of the evening socializing with Ed and his wife, leaving Bonnie alone at the table. Jeff and Ed quickly hit it off and began a friendship. Eventually, Bonnie and Cynthia also grew close, regularly visiting each other's families and celebrating holidays together. Ed invested in Jeff's business by purchasing 100 vending machines and connecting him with valuable partnerships. This investment allowed Jeff to place machines in prime locations throughout the city, leading to the success of his business. Despite the rapid development of the business, soon, Bonnie became the main breadwinner of the family. Her career as a real estate agent was thriving. During this time, Jeff retired a little from business Respawn and spent more time with their son. The boy helped service vending machines, buy products for them, and carry out scheduled repairs. Jeff also started attending his son's training sessions and sporting events. Despite the fact that the life of both families seemed ideal from the outside, problems continued inside. Cynthia, who was 40 years old at the time, struggled with depression. Her friends encouraged her to participate in a local beauty contest in Agaya in 2000, specifically for married women over 21. Although Cynthia met the age requirement, she would be competing against younger women, many nearly half her age. Despite this challenge, she was determined and motivated. Winning the contest could allow her to represent her state at the national level and potentially advance to international competitions. The prizes included gold jewelry and complimentary beauty salon appointments. Cynthia was motivated by a desire to win and prove that she was the most beautiful in the city and the state. Her main goal was to gain influence. To prepare for the beauty contest, she tightened her diet and increased her training. Ultimately, Cynthia placed third in the competition. Despite her disappointment, she held her head high and smiled when the winner was announced. Competing at 40 years old as a mother of 7 against 20-year-olds was a significant achievement in itself. Even though she didn't win first place, her popularity grew. On June 16, 2001, multiple calls came into the police station near a gas station reporting an attack on the driver of an Ford SUV vehicle. 2 witnesses heard an explosion and saw a man, injured in the head, still alive, but struggling to breathe. Fortunately, a nearby nurse intervened, with help from another bystander, to pull the victim out of the car and provide first aid. They called emergency services and managed to keep the driver alive until paramedics arrived. The man was rushed to a medical center, where doctors did everything they could to save him. However, he tragically died just minutes after arrival. Law enforcement quickly secured the area and the vehicle. The driver's side window was shattered. The bullet entered through the cheek and exited the other side of the skull, breaking the passenger window. The deformed bullet was later discovered on the street near the car, while the cartridge case was found approximately 100 meters away from the parking lot. Witnesses, including a gas station employee, Carolyn Hyson, saw the victim arrive just before the attack. Shortly after, a motorcyclist pulled up, calmly approached the driver's side window, and attacked with weapons. Carolyn had a clear view of the criminal as he looked directly at her before he got on his motorcycle and rode away. He was a stocky man with dark hair, dressed entirely in black, resembling Ghost Rider, which seemed unusual for a summer day. However, he was wearing a helmet, so she couldn't see his face. Meanwhile, she was able to provide a detailed description of the motorcycle. It was a Street Fighter model, black and gray with neon green lights. She recalled that this distinctive man had been seen riding back and forth on the street multiple times, as if he was deliberately waiting for his target. After Carolyn reported the case at work, 2 managers ran out to the car. They were the ones who provided first aid and called an ambulance. The police quickly accessed the gas station's surveillance footage, but unfortunately, the quality was too poor to identify the attacker. They could see the motorcycle, but not its license plate. Detectives began investigating the identity of the murdered man to compile a list of potential suspects. To their surprise, they discovered that many people had negative opinions about him. Jeff was known to be difficult, hot-tempered, and often argued with neighbors over trivial matters. The investigation found that Jeff had several problematic business relationships and was involved with married women. He also had a criminal record. In 1981, he was convicted for running an illegal escort agency in Arizona. At the store where he frequently purchased supplies for his machines, people spoke poorly of him. He was notorious for flirting with attractive female employees, many of whom were schoolgirls working part-time. One witness recounted an incident involving a 17-year-old girl whom Jeff harassed to obtain her phone number. After she reluctantly provided it, he began calling her incessantly, offering money for intimate. This harassment continued until the girl's father intervened, threatening Jeff with legal action for corrupting a minor. There were other similar incidents, which contributed to his tarnished reputation. Detectives were aware of many individuals who might seek revenge against him. When the police arrived at Jeff's family's home to inform his wife about the incident, she was shocked and started to cry. They had been married for 15 years. Although she couldn't believe what had happened, she didn't appear especially surprised, given her husband's controversial reputation and the many people who disliked him. Bonnie recounted the events of the day her husband was killed. That morning, Jeff was at home with his wife and son. He needed to go on his usual trip to check on the machines and restock them. Jeff asked his son for help, but the boy, upset with his father, refused. This prompted an argument between them, which Bonnie mentioned was a common occurrence. She herself was tired of the behavior of her husband, who treated her frankly badly. She admitted that she was thinking about divorce. Fortunately the teenager refused to help his father. It is possible that this saved his life. Typically, When disagreements arose, Jeff would react aggressively towards his son. During one instance, he attempted to involve Bonnie in an unpleasant discussion, but she chose to ignore him. He then claimed to have found a new woman who was superior to Bonnie in every way. She recognized this as another attempt to provoke her and continued to disregard his comment. To back up his claim, Jeff left the house, stating he was going to see his mistress. However, in reality, he went to wholesale warehouses to purchase items for vending machines. For several hours, he was in stores arranging merchandise, with this confirmed by witnesses and surveillance footage. The trips ended with a stop near a gas station where the killer acted quickly. There was reason to believe that Jeff was a big fan of lying. He frequently confided in a friend for the most intimate things. The police interviewed this friend, and he confirmed that Jeff tended to exaggerate his past to fit in with wealthier social circles. They also spoke with the victim's son. He supported his mother's account of a conflict with his father that morning. He struggled with mixed emotions regarding his parents. He loved his father, as they had grown closer recently. However, he was deeply troubled by his father's treatment of his mother, having witnessed years of emotional abuse and infidelity. The schoolboy really wanted to help find the killer. The numerous betrayals of Jeff seemed like a valuable clue. In addition, shortly before the massacre, Jeff deceived the contractors who were doing construction work. He paid them only about $7,000, less than the initial agreement, under a far-fetched pretext. However, these builders had a confirmed alibi. Bonnie stated that she didn't have specific suspicions about the killer, but she described Jeff as having a nasty and aggressive personality, which could lead him into trouble at any moment. She mentioned that he frequently received threatening messages and calls. One of the strange messages was saved on the answering machine, and she showed it to the police. It was received on Wednesday, June 13, at 2:55 p.m. from a man. According to Bonnie, when Jeff listened to the message, he became visibly agitated. Previously, he had taken such calls lightly, sometimes even joking about them, but this time he became restless and started pacing the room, deep in thought. Bonnie didn't know who the caller was, but she felt the voice on the recording sounded menacing. After the conversation, he said goodbye and mentioned they would speak again soon. Bonnie revealed that her husband left and went into hiding for several days after the call. He only returned home on Saturday morning, just before his death, and was in a very bad mood. The police interviewed all of Jeff's relatives and friends. Even his parents described Jeff as a swindler and a manipulator, someone unreliable, often distracted, who could also be involved in mischief and intimidation. During their investigation, officials discovered light illegal substances in Jeff's pockets, pointing to another area of inquiry. It seemed Jeff had connections to the criminal underworld, or perhaps he owed someone money, and this became the reason for the massacre. However, this line of investigation also led to no new findings. A forensic expert established more details surrounding the cause of death. The bullet entered through the right ear, damaging the oral cavity and causing severe bleeding. Within minutes, his lungs filled with blood, leading to choking. The wound itself turned out to be non-fatal. After talking to people involved with Jeff, the detectives eventually contacted the George, who had a close relationship with Jeff. They discovered that Cynthia was one of Jeff's mistresses, and their affair had lasted nearly a decade. This revelation drew significant attention during the investigation. The investigators also was revealed that Cynthia had a history of infidelity, maintaining several extramarital relationships. Before, when the detectives arrived at George's family mansion, Cynthia answered the door. She appeared disoriented, speaking slowly and in a confused manner. She claimed to already know about the murder because her husband showed her a newspaper that reported on Jeff's death on the front page. This event upset her. Cynthia was reluctant to answer many of their questions. She gave vague responses to some inquiries and ignored others altogether. Ed also responded evasively, denying any involvement of their family in the tragedy. They was clearly trying to avoid being connected to the investigation or appearing in police reports, as this could harm their reputation. Cynthia provided an alibi for both herself and Ed. Then that was verified. Surprisingly, Bonnie was fully aware of the affair between her husband and Cynthia. Jeff had informed his son about the relationship several years after it began. The reason for this disclosure was unclear. This painted a negative picture of Jeff's character. Bonnie suspected the affair as early as 1998, when she accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Jeff and Cynthia. Although she caught him being unfaithful, he managed to reassure her and deflect her concerns. Realizing she needed stronger evidence, Bonnie decided to spy on her husband and eventually confirmed her suspicions is right. By the end of 1999, Jeff confessed that he had been involved with Cynthia for 10 years. He claimed that their relationship had ended, and they were now just business partners. The mother of Jeff supported Bonnie's claims, stating that she was aware of her son's infidelities, including his involvement with Cynthia. Jeff frequently shared his personal thoughts with his mother, but she also insisted that he loved and respected Bonnie. After speaking with close friends of the George family, the police uncovered several intriguing details. Jeff met Cynthia at a club in 1991, where he pretended to be a doctor. When Cynthia discovered he was lying, he created a new story, claiming to be a special agent. This deception captivated Cynthia, a socialite. Interestingly, it was Cynthia who wrote the check to purchase the machines, not her husband. Her feelings for Jeff Stem was explained by Ed's preoccupation with work, which leaves her feeling neglected. Some suspected that Ed might have been aware of it for years. However, his strong Catholic beliefs prevented him from ending his marriage to the mother of his 7 children. Others thought he was completely unaware of the situation and blindly trusted his attractive wife. During the interrogation, the nanny shared valuable insights. She, describing Cynthia as self-centered, noted that Cynthia paid little attention to their children. She also saw Cynthia and Jeff, along with their children. She mentioned that Jeff treated his mistress similarly to how he treated his wife, including an incident where he hit Cynthia in public, leaving a bruise on her face. Additionally, it was revealed that Cynthia's youngest daughter might have been the result of an affair, as Jeff showed a lot of affection towards little girl and even took her for walks. It seemed unlikely that someone like him would invest time in another person's child. Due to these suspicions, Cynthia's youngest daughter had to undergo a DNA test, which confirmed that Jeff was indeed her father. After leaving the doctor's office with little girl, Ed stated that he didn't care about her biological parentage. He would love her, just like he loved his other children. Eventually, Cynthia admitted to having an affair with Jeff, but she kept her other secret relationships hidden. It's difficult to believe that Ed wasn't deeply troubled by his wife's infidelity at that moment. A few weeks before the murder, Ed tried to address some issues. He apparently suspected that Jeff was having an affair with Cynthia and wanted to protect her from him. However, Jeff refused the restraining order. Furthermore, Jeff's son reported that his father has shown fearful of Ed in the weeks leading up to the incident, making Ed the primary suspect. However, detectives lacked evidence to prove his involvement. Ed's alibi checked out, but this did not eliminate the possibility that he might have hired someone to commit the crime. A reward was offered for information regarding the murder. An informant, the ex-girlfriend of a man named John Zaffino, reached out to the police. She recalled that in 2001, John had mentioned beating up an Israeli. After hearing about the murder of Jeff Zach, who was identified as a former Israeli paratrooper with gray hair, she wondered if there was a connection. She contacted John, but he was evasive. It also came to light that John owned the same type of motorcycle that was seen at the scene of Jeff's murder. This prompts law enforcement to focus on the 36-year-old John, who had a reputation for being very cruel and dangerous. Immediately after, she ended the relationship because she feared for her safety. After experiencing multiple incidents of domestic violence, the woman decided to call John and asked several leading questions. Through their conversation, it became apparent that John might be involved in Jeff's death. She also engaged in several more similar phone calls, attempting to extract a confession from him, but he responded in a paranoid manner, avoiding direct answers. Upon investigating John, It was discovered that he had access to a .357 Magnum weapon, which was the same type as the Jeff's murder weapon. Interestingly, it was also confirmed by multiple witnesses that he knew Cynthia. The story is reenacted that Cynthia met John, an unemployed truck driver, in 2000, and they began an affair while she was still in a relationship with Jeff. 9 months later, in May 2001, she decided to end her relationship with Jeff and asked him to stop contacting her. However, Jeff was persistent and continued to call. Cynthia's husband noticed these unusual phone calls and suspected her. Whenever he picked up, the caller would hang up immediately. Ed did not want a public investigation and public attention to his private life, so he did nothing. Yet, he suspected that at the center of this problem was his wife's relationship with John. Details of their relationship become clearer when several expensive purchases give John are discovered. John claimed he was at a car dealership about 40 minutes from the crime scene at the time of the attack. However, the investigation revealed that he was actually on a mobile phone call and his location was tracked to a gas station. He only arrived at the car dealership 2 hours later. Investigators were able to track John's geolocation and review his phone records, leading them to suspect that Cynthia had ordered the crime. Adding to the evidence, a voice analysis confirmed that a threatening phone call received by Jeff was directed at John. The police believed that Jeff had begun threatening Cynthia when she decided to end their relationship, which he strongly opposed, which was quite consistent with Jeff's temperament. Feeling threatened, Cynthia decided to take action against him. On the tragic morning following an argument with his wife and son, Jeff looked up information about Cynthia, who he was deeply infatuated with and wanted to keep. The prosecution presented a clear narrative, but there was no evidence implicating Cynthia, so only John was taken into custody. John Zaffino's trial started on February 26, 2003. When called to testify on March 7, Cynthia chose to invoke her Fifth Amendment right, which allows her to avoid self-incrimination. Ed made the same choice. The main witness for the prosecution was John's ex-girlfriend, who detailed events from John's life leading up to the murder. The investigators also provided the murder weapon and confirmed that John owned it. Ballistic tests eliminated any doubts about this connection. However, there were no eyewitnesses identifying John as the perpetrator, nor was there any DNA evidence at the crime scene, which made the prosecutor's job more challenging. On March 10, 2003, after 4 hours of deliberation, John Zaffino was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. 23 years after the verdict, Bonnie approached John, stating that he was merely a pawn while Cynthia enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, asked if it was worth it. She likely hoped John would express his anger and reveal the truth, but he chose to remain silent. For a long time, the police lacked solid evidence against Cynthia. To bring her to justice, they gathered information about her involvement, piece by piece. On January 10, 2005, Cynthia was arrested while shopping. Ed posted bail of $2 million, allowing her to remain at home until her trial began in November 2005. The case gained momentum when new evidence emerged. Investigators discovered that John had planned to attack Jeff on May 8 while Jeff was relaxing in a national park. During this time, John was on a bridge talking on the phone with Cynthia for about 3 hours. She was also on another call with Jeff, coordinating their actions. The attack was interrupted when a park ranger noticed John's weapon case. When questioned, John claimed this was a misunderstanding and waiting for his girlfriend. A week later, a mushroom picker found a weapon in the park, which provided indirect evidence of Cynthia's involvement in the conspiracy. Ed hired a strong defense team of 5 lawyers for his wife, significantly reducing the prosecution's chances of success. During the trial, many revealing details emerged about Cynthia and her affair with John. The investigators was noted that Cynthia even paid for John's lawyers. One significant piece of evidence included recorded phone conversations between John and his sisters. which featured incriminating remarks in which he pressured Cynthia to uphold her part of their agreement. The defense argued that Cynthia had no reason to want Jeff dead and no motive to be involved in a murder plot. In contrast, the prosecution firmly claimed that Cynthia had a motive for the murder. After their breakup, Jeff tried to keep Cynthia in his life. They frequently argued, especially concerning their daughter, whom he threatened to take with him to Israel. Cynthia also felt at risk of their affair being revealed by Jeff, which could lead to her public humiliation. During the trial, 2 letters from Cynthia to John, who was in prison, were presented. These letters revealed their ongoing romantic relationship and showed that she remained deeply connected to him. In one letter, she sent him a Bible and expressed that she frequently prays for him. After facing public humiliation due to Cynthia's actions, Ed defended her against conspiracy charges. He emphasized his commitment to their marriage vows and refused to seek a divorce. Surprisingly, Cynthia chose not to testify in her defense, and John also did not take the stand. Ultimately, Cynthia was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and received, with the possibility of parole in a year. After the trial, Ed continued to defend his wife. He hired new lawyers who filed an appeal on her behalf. Cynthia served 16 months before she was released on March 22 after Ohio's 9th District Court of Appeals ruled that the circumstantial evidence presented by prosecutors, including phone records, correspondence, and financial documents, was insufficient to prove her guilty. Cynthia continues to live a normal life now. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Nohema Graber. When a student at Fairfield High School received his Spanish test results, he found that his entire exam had been marked in red pen. He had failed because received a low grade. He was furious in front of his classmates, but the teacher reassured him, stating that she believed in his abilities and that he just needed to prepare better for the next test. Little did the elderly woman know that this would later have a tragic effect on her life. Fairfield is a small, quiet town in the southeastern part of the state of Quince, with a population of around 99,000 people. It features beautiful architecture and has about 12 parks and recreational areas, which is a significant number for a town of its size. One of these parks was a favorite walking spot for teacher Nohema Graber. She followed a daily routine of taking a certain number of steps to stay active and maintain her health, enjoying the tranquility and beauty of nature. However, on November 2, 2021, after finishing her workday, Nohema was tragically killed, leaving the residents of Fairfield in shock and fear. What a devastating event for their once peaceful town. Nohema was born on November 10, 1954, in Jalapa, Mexico, where she grew up in a loving family. From a young age, she was known for her openness and kindness. At the age of 20, Nohema began her career as a flight attendant for a major Mexican airline, which allowed her to indulge her passion for travel and an active lifestyle. She became one of the first women in Mexico to train as a pilot, paving the way for future female pilots in this challenging yet prestigious field. In 1985, at the age of 31, Nohema met Paul Graber, who was visiting Mexico on a business trip. They first encountered each other at a nightclub. After their meeting, Paul received Nohema's phone number and called her a few days later. Initially, he thought she was ignoring him, but she agreed to go on a date. Their relationship quickly blossomed into a romance. After a year of dating, on October 4, 1986, Nohema and Paul got married in Mexico. They then settled in Nohema's hometown, where she continued her work in the airline industry while Paul found a job in this new country. In 1991, after 5 years of marriage, the Graber family welcomed their first child, a son named Christian. A year later, they had another son, Jareth. Nohema, who was 37 and had worked for 17 years, decided to focus on her family. During the 1990s, the area where they lived became increasingly dangerous, prompting they to make the significant decision to leave Mexico and move to America. Paul's homeland. In 1992, they settled in Fairfield, where Paul found a well-paying job and supported the family, while Nohema became a stay-at-home mom. Soon after, she gave birth to their daughter, Naima. Nohema quickly adapted to life in the U.S. and began attending St. Mary's Catholic Church, where she made a donation and eventually became a community leader. As time went on, their children grew up and began to move out, leaving Nohema feeling bored and lacking purpose. Once she turned 50, she decided to pursue further education and enrolled at Westland University in Mount Plant, Iowa. There, she earned a degree in English and a teaching certificate. Nohema then secured a job at a high school in Atashtat, Iowa, where she taught Spanish for several years, gaining valuable experience. In 2012, Nohema began teaching at Fairfield High School. Her students and colleagues appreciated her greatly, often speaking of her fondly. Graduates would send her postcards and letters, and she made it a point to respond, and always ending her replies with her signature message, "Be more confident." On November 2, 2021, after school, Nohema drove to the park. She was active and enjoyed walking, but that day she did not return home. Her husband, Paul, grew concerned when she didn't answer his calls. He went to the park and searched their usual spots, but he was unable to find her anywhere, and her car, a blue 1997 Honda Odyssey, was also missing. Feeling anxious, Paul promptly contacted the police to report. Right away, a search began in the park for Nohema. Her colleagues reported that she had not shown up for work, and since the previous evening, she had stopped responding to calls and messages. Meanwhile, students contacted the police with information about their classmate. They revealed that the night before, he had shared disturbing photos on social network. These photos were sent by Jeremy Goodale, a 16-year-old student at Fairfield High School. Born in 2005, Jeremy grew up in a dysfunctional family with 4 older siblings. His parents frequently argued and were often absent, leaving the older children to care for the younger ones. Eventually, the parents divorced. The mother moved in with another man, leaving her children behind to live with their father in the family home. The living conditions in the house were chaotic. It was filled with dirt and dust, flies buzzed around, and the bed linens had gone unchanged for months. They washed only once a week. The children lacked female care and love, so looked unkempt. Jeremy was described by his classmates as a quiet and modest boy who played on a baseball team. He didn't stand out much, except for his messy appearance. However, Jeremy faced more serious issues. He struggled with depression, anxiety, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Doctors prescribed him medication to help. He studied Spanish with a teacher named Nohema, and his best friend was Willard Miller. Unlike Jeremy, Willard came from a wealthy family, but he found school challenging, particularly with foreign languages. Willard had recently transferred to Fairfield High School after attending a prestigious school with a tougher curriculum. On November 3, the body of Nohema was discovered near the railway in the north. She was lying on the ground wrapped in a tarpaulin, covered with old sleepers, various garbage, branches, and leaves. At the time of the discovery, she had died many hours ago. An initial examination revealed that Nohema died from blunt force trauma to the head. What does that mean? Her death was a homicide, and that her body had been deliberately concealed. Witnesses reported seeing Nohema's Honda Odyssey leave the park around 5:00 p.m. She had spent approximately 45 minutes there. However, the witnesses could not identify or describe the actual driver. Shortly afterward, the police found her blue Honda abandoned on a country road south of where her body was located. Another witness later came forward, stating they saw 2 young men walking along this same road around 5:30 p.m., heading back to the park. One of them was pushing an old garden wheelbarrow. Unfortunately, this witness could not describe the young men and did not remember their faces. Based on the suspicious photo that went viral, The police arrived at Jeremy's house. He seemed agitated. Although he knew that the teacher was missing, he was unaware that her body had already been discovered. He denied any involvement in her disappearance, but was not informed about what the police had found at his home. Detectives discovered a blood-stained baseball bat and several black hairs in his house. They also found clothes and a blood-stained terry towel belonging to him. On Jeremy's phone, they found a text file titled "Preparation," which detailed the items needed for a planned act, including rubber gloves, wet wipes, a backpack, a bag, a blanket, a garden wheelbarrow, and other supplies. The file also outlined a step-by-step plan of actions. After the officers finished inspecting Jeremy's house, they proceeded to Willard's home. At that time, Willard, like Jeremy, was unaware that their teacher had already been found dead. Willard remained calm during the police questioning and readily discussed how he and Jeremy had walked in the local park the previous evening. However, he became visibly nervous when the conversation shifted to Nohema. His demeanor changed as he mentioned that Nohema did not regard him highly and often underestimated him. Meanwhile, the community of Fairfield was shocked and mourned the passing of Nohema, as she was known to be kind, compassionate, and always helpful to her students, leaving everyone puzzled about why anyone would want to harm her. After searches of the houses, Jeremy Gudella and Willard Miller were arrested and taken into custody on suspicion of murdering their Spanish language teacher. During their interrogation, they were informed that the body had been discovered. Both provided similar accounts of the events. They admitted to walking in the park that afternoon when they encountered their teacher. They greeted her, but suddenly, a group of masked individuals attacked Nohema, hitting her on the head with a bat, causing her to lose consciousness and fall. Jeremy and Willard claimed they were forced to watch as the assailants continued to assault her. They alleged that they were then told to hide the body, take her car, and abandon it near a country road. Jeremy and Willard denied any wrongdoing, asserting that they were merely witnesses to the murder and had been compelled to obey the orders of the true criminals. However, evidence found in Jeremy's house suggested otherwise. The blood and hair found on the baseball bat, as well as the blood on Jeremy's clothes and towel, all belonged to Nohema. Furthermore, there were no witnesses who saw a group of masked individuals or any strangers in the park. A notebook discovered in Jeremy's house revealed that he and his friends had been stalking Nohema for several weeks. They recorded the times her classes ended, when she left school, how long she spent in her car, and where she went afterward. This detailed documentation of Nohema's schedule indicated that it was easy for them to predict her daily movements. The young men knew that Nohema walked in the park every day and were familiar with this route. They chose the right moment to attack Nohema while she was walking alone on a dark, deserted street. During questioning, Willard admitted that he disliked Nohema because he felt she always underestimated him. He acknowledged that he frequently argued with her during class, and his classmates had witnessed these confrontations. These two young men told conflicting stories. This time, Jeremy accused Willard of hitting Nohema, while Willard insisted he had not touched her, claiming that it was Jeremy who had killed her. During the investigation, the investigators was uncovered that on the day of the incident, Jeremy and Willard went to a park and concealed themselves in an out-of-the-way spot while they waited. When Nohema arrived, one of them struck her on the head with a bat, causing her to lose consciousness and collapse. The two then dragged her off the path and took turns assaulting her until she died. Afterward, they covered her body with branches and leaves before fleeing the scene in her car, which they abandoned on a country road. While walking, they made their way to Willard's house, where they took a garden wheelbarrow, a shovel, and a tarpaulin. They returned to the crime scene, wrapped the victim in the tarpaulin, placed her in the wheelbarrow, and transported her to the railroad tracks. There, they concealed the body by placing old railway sleepers, garbage, branches, and fallen leaves on top. Once the body was hidden, Jeremy and Willard returned home and attempted to clean up any evidence of their crime, believing they would never be discovered. Detectives discovered unusual search queries on Willard's phone, including: do students receive credit for a lesson if a teacher is seriously injured or dies during a course? And what happens to students' work if a teacher dies mid-course? Before the incident, Willard had planned a trip to Spain, but after receiving a low grade on a test, that trip became uncertain. Prosecutors viewed Willard as the main instigator of the crime, driven by a desire for revenge against the teacher, while his friend Jeremy appeared to be following Willard's lead. Additionally, Jeremy struggled with depression and anxiety, which made him emotionally vulnerable and easier to manipulate. This made him a more suitable accomplice for Willard's malicious scheme. During his trial in December 2021, Jeremy pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and agreed to testify against Willard. In his testimony, Jeremy claimed that Willard was the first to attack their teacher, Nohema Graber, on the afternoon of November 2, 2021, when they both invited her out. He stated that Willard pushed her, causing her to fall and sustain serious injuries. However, Jeremy also confessed that after Nohema lost consciousness, he used a baseball bat to strike her multiple times, resulting in her death. Jeremy claimed that he and Willard beat her together to ensure that Nohema would not survive. Throughout the trial, Jeremy continually cried and asked for forgiveness from the family of the deceased. He expressed deep remorse for what had happened. Willard also admitted his guilt, but maintained that Jeremy had delivered the first blow. In court, Willard was more composed. Like Jeremy, he sought forgiveness from the Graber family. He said, "I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you. I regret that your family is suffering because of me. I sincerely apologize from the bottom of my heart. I fully recognize the seriousness of my actions. I know I was wrong." Willard Miller was the first to be sentenced in June 2023, receiving a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Sadly, another tragic event occurred following this story. Nohema's husband, Paul Graber, passed away in June 2023 from terminal cancer. Paul, 68, was buried the day before Willard's verdict was announced, and he never saw his wife's killers face justice. Paul's family and friends reported that he was deeply affected by his wife's death. They believed that if Nohema had been alive, she would have noticed Paul's illness early and sought timely treatment, which might have saved his life. In November 2023, Jeremy Goodale was found guilty in connection with the case of Nohema and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. During the trial, Jeremy was so distraught that he experienced a nosebleed and cried. He expressed regret, saying, "I wish I could turn back time to prevent this loss and the pain I caused the family. It was the worst decision of my life, and I take full responsibility for what I did." Nohema Graber had 3 adult children, brothers, sisters, nephews, and nieces, who certainly miss their beloved and caring mother. They fondly remember their mother and father. It is known that the sons and daughter forgave the murderers and try not to remember them. After their mother's death, one of the sons found their mother's personal diary. In it, she wrote short notes about her life, expressing that she loved teaching and adored her students very much. Nohema wrote that she would always smile and give her students support, stating that even if she could not teach them anything new, just looking at her would help the students learn to love life. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Christine Larson. Love is a wonderful feeling about which books are written, music is created, and films are made. However, if it is the twisted love of a sick person, it can ruin many lives. The treachery of some villains goes beyond all boundaries. A criminal can hide so effectively that, until the very last moment, it remains unclear whether he is crying sincerely in grief or shedding crocodile tears while enjoying his bloody triumph. The incident we will discuss today occurred in St. Paul Park, Minnesota, USA, just half an hour's drive from Minneapolis. Here, a close-knit local community of about 5,000 people transformed their town into a beautiful, shining paradise for the holidays, with every decorated house radiating warmth and comfort. It was in this town that the couple dubbed Larson and Deborah Tilson lived. On February 24, 1988, their daughter Christine was born, becoming the youngest of their 4 children. Notably, they had taken a significant break before her birth. The older siblings helped their parents care for Christine. From the very beginning, she stood out among the other children due to her energy and mobility. Christine was always like this and maintained her zest for life until her last breath. In 2004, at the age of 16, she began dating a boy named Zachary Otis Matthews. Their relationship was going well, and by 2006 they had a son named Darian. Christine and Zachary moved in with her parents during her pregnancy to receive support from her mother and loved ones. She spent nearly all her free time in the Larson household, and they grew very close. For Christine, her son became everything. She centered her life around motherhood and household chores. Although Zachary initially seemed like a loving and caring father, after a few months of living together, they both realized they wanted more independence and moved out from Christine's parents' home. Zachary grew up in a troubled family with an alcoholic father who regularly abused him both physically and emotionally. Nevertheless, his difficult childhood did not make him angry. Instead, he was determined to build healthy relationships and raise normal children, viewing his parents as an example of what he did not want to repeat. Christine never used illegal substances and did not like alcohol or noisy parties. She avoided dubious company and anything associated with crime. Prior to giving birth, she focused entirely on motherhood but also thought ahead, not wanting to depend on her parents financially. She aimed to explore various fields in order to identify the most promising direction for her career. Therefore, she enrolled in bartender school and planned to attend nursing school afterward. Unfortunately, all these ambitious ideas were doomed to failure. On the evening of December 19, 2007, Christine planned to bake Christmas cookies with her mother. It was a family tradition to bake signature cookies according to her grandmother's recipe every New Year's holiday. In the late afternoon, Christine intended to return home to do this, but she had been out running errands during the day. Her mother stayed at home with her husband and adult children, waiting for Christine's return. Evening fell, but she had still not arrived. They tried to call her, but were unable to reach her. Deborah was concerned but wanted to give her daughter a little more time. Perhaps she was delayed for a good reason and would return soon. Unbeknownst to Deborah, while she was worried and trying to contact Christine, about half an hour away from their home, a man reported to the rescue service that he had seen a car burning in an alley near his house at around 8 p.m. Initially, the man called to report only the burning car, but then he grew curious about what was happening and examined the scene more closely. Just a couple of minutes after his first call, he made a second call, stating that there appeared to be a person inside the car. When firefighters and police arrived on the scene, it was too late. They found a charred body inside the vehicle. Although the face was badly damaged, it was evident that the victim was female. Furthermore, there were signs of strangulation on her neck and blood vessels around her eyes, indicating she had experienced prolonged and severe compression of the throat. The police observed that the victim was not wearing a jacket or shoes, which seemed strange given that December 19th in Minnesota was very cold. Anyone dressed like that would likely freeze. The authorities suspected that the victim might have been killed elsewhere, and that the car had been set ablaze to hide the traces of the crime. Examination of the burned vehicle led fire experts to conclude that the fire had started in the back seat. A nearly completely charred phone book was found there. During the investigation, a handbag was discovered containing a driver's license in the name of Christine Larson, along with a photo of her with her son. An empty child's seat was also found in the back seat, raising concerns about the child's whereabouts and safety. The man who reported the burning car spoke with detectives. Their information helped clarify the timeline of events. According to initial investigation, the victim had sustained a blow to the head from a blunt object, after which something resembling a cord or wire had been wrapped around her neck, leading to her death. It was obvious that this was a brutal, premeditated murder, and the arson of the car was intended to hide these traces to confuse the investigation. Meanwhile, the family of Christine was still at home, perplexed. Why hadn't Christine returned? Her mother was still waiting for her daughter's help in making cookies. However, Christine's stepfather, Daniel Tilson, tried to calm everyone down. He reminded his wife that their daughter was a 19-year-old girl who wanted to go for a walk and have fun, especially since they were talking about a very energetic, spontaneous person. So, they simply turned on the TV and sat down to watch, thinking that their daughter was spending time with friends. Both parents had to go to work, so the couple decided to forego the holiday cookies that evening and cook them later. However, when Deborah turned on the TV to watch the news before going to bed, they saw a report about a young girl found dead in a burning car. They didn't even think it could be Christine. Deborah and Daniel looked at each other, almost in unison, thought how terrible it was to be the parents of a daughter who died in such a horrible way. Then, they turned off the bad news and went to bed. Around 3 a.m., there was a knock on the Larsons' door. When they opened the door, police officers from the Minneapolis Police Department stood on the threshold. The officers entered the kitchen, where one of them delivered the tragic news. Another unpleasant piece of news for them was the disappearance of Christine's son, Darian. The police had searched the child in the home of Christine's relatives, but he was not there. No one had the slightest idea where the baby was at that moment. During the day, he had been visiting his father's house. To everyone's relief, the police officers were able to contact Zachary, and it turned out that Darian was with him. He did not understand why he was being disturbed at such a late hour and thought that it could be about Christine. He explained that they were supposed to meet that day, go shopping together, but since she had disappeared and ignored all his calls, he spent the day in despair. When Deborah conveyed the terrible news to him over the phone, he burst into hysterical tears. Somehow, Zachary managed to calm down. Deborah invited him and the child to visit them at their house. They wanted to unite to cope with the consequences of this terrible tragedy. Zachary immediately agreed. The police wanted to talk to the parents of Christine to clarify the circumstances of the last days of Christine's life. They provided valuable information, revealing that Christine and Zachary had broken up 2 months before these events. Although they maintained warm relations for the sake of their child and continued to communicate as friends, they did not live together. Christine's parents still considered Zachary part of the family. Firstly, he was the father of their grandson and wanted to play a full role in the child's life. Secondly, he had not given up hope of rekindling his relationship with Christine. They said that the young parents had lived in the family home for quite some time before deciding to move to St. Paul. They rented an apartment located about 15 minutes away by car. However, after the move, the parents began to notice that Christine was not very happy with her family life. Zachary was drawn to parties and entertainment, which did not align with what the young mother had expected. Despite her modern and active outlook on life, Christine now wanted a home that offered an atmosphere of peace and quiet to focus on her child. She didn't like that her boyfriend viewed everything differently. He wasn't on the same page with her and was often leaving her to care for the child alone. After a couple of months, Christine decided to break up with him and return to her family home. Back to the case, according to Deborah, the last time she saw her daughter was around 1 p.m. on that fateful day, December 19th. Christine had plans until the evening. First, she was going to give her friend a ride to the gas station and then meet Zachary to go for a walk and pick up Darian. This was valuable information for the police, who immediately went to the gas station where Christine was supposed to meet her friend to fill up the car. The CCTV footage was confiscated, revealing Christine entering the store and even joking with the seller before meeting her friend. She appeared to be in a good mood, and the footage did not record anything incriminating. The investigators was decided to meet Zachary on the morning of December 20th. He came to the police station voluntarily for a planned conversation. According to his confession, Christine hadn't even had time to reach him that day. He stated that they had a strong relationship connected by their child. Zachary still maintained a warm relationship with Christine and her family. Zachary acknowledged that his love for socializing with friends made him seem unstable in Christine's eyes, but he saw it as a way to relax after work. This was the reason for their breakup. Although they continued to maintain a loving relationship, it somewhat contradicted the words of Christine's parents, who never mentioned anything about the resumption of Christine's relationship with Zachary. In fact, on his social media page, he indicated that he was married, even though they never officially tied the knot. Christina repeatedly asked him to remove this statement, but he refused and hoped that they would restore their relationship and eventually get married. Zachary also stated that in December they had joint plans. Christine was supposed to come to pick up their son at around 2 p.m. All three of them were going to go to the store for Christmas presents. They also wanted to stop by a festival dedicated to the holiday so that the baby could see everything. Zachary called Christine at 2:20 p.m. and then several more times, but she ignored him. Then Zachary decided to take the bus with his son to the festival on his own, thinking that as soon as Christine showed up, she would call, and he would come back. He didn't want to waste time, so he made this decision around 3 p.m., collected the child, and they both left for the festival. The father and son arrived there at about 4 p.m. and stayed for only about an hour. First, the noise bothered the baby. He didn't want to disturb him. Secondly, he didn't want to be there for long without Christine's company, as she never got in touch. Thirdly, he believed that during this time she could return for the child, and he was waiting for her. According to him, when he returned home, there was no one there. He claimed to have spent the rest of the evening and night waiting until he received an alarming call from his beloved's relatives. His alibi was quickly confirmed since at the festival there were special sheets for registration where attendees had to sign in upon arrival. During the check, Zachary's name was found. Additionally, several witnesses confirmed seeing him and child at the event. Despite initially becoming the main suspect, he was almost immediately ruled out after the news of Christine's murder. Zachary posted on his social media page that he missed her and would do everything for their son to ensure that the boy smiled, as Christine would have wanted. While detectives attended the festival and corroborated Zachary's story, they managed to find a new potential clue reported by friends of Christine. According to them, shortly before her death, Christine had met a young man named Derek, her new boyfriend. The detectives decided to check the alibi of the former by contacting Derek and arranging a meeting with him at the station. However, they were unable to reach him, which raised suspicion, prompting the police to look for him more actively. It turned out that he had not shown up for work on December 20th, the day after Christine's death. No one who knew him had seen him since. This seemed like an even stranger coincidence. He never returned for his work shift and did not answer phone calls, making him technically missing. On December 21st, they managed to contact him through his friends, persuading him to come to the police station voluntarily. According to Derek's account, he saw Christine on December 19th at around 2:15 p.m. He claimed he was walking along St. Paul Park Street near his house when she drove by. His apartment was located just a few minutes' walk from Zachary's. According to the reconstructed timeline, she was heading to her former partner's place to pick up her child. Derek waved at her, and she stopped, confirming that she was indeed going to pick up gifts. They chatted for a short time about an upcoming meeting and decided they could meet later that evening or the next day. Christine left, promising to call, but then simply stopped getting in touch. Derek confirmed that she seemed fine, with no unusual behavior or appearance. She was excited about the upcoming holidays with her family and in good spirits. The police believed Derek's account since he remained calm, answered questions clearly, and did not raise any suspicion. His words were corroborated when detectives checked the surveillance camera recordings from one of the houses. He accurately described the meeting with Christine. Derek had indeed left the area and did not seem suspicious. He justified his strange absence from work by stating he was sick, and his management confirmed this. However, this situation confused the detectives. They did not dismiss Derek and did not want to overlook any clues. Given the time intervals Derek indicated, he became the last person known to have seen Christine alive, thus moving to the top of the suspect list for the murder. They obtained warrants, including permission to check the records of Zachary's phone conversations. The police, however, could not connect Derek to the crime. They were physically in different locations all day, only crossing paths for a few minutes. The investigation simply lacked sufficient information, but detectives noted that near the location where the burning car and body were found, there was an interstate highway equipped with numerous surveillance cameras. The police decided to review any violations or instances of reckless driving reported on December 19th. It turned out that night an unknown person had called emergency services to report reckless driving, describing how an unidentified man was driving along the freeway from Minneapolis towards St. Paul Park. According to the description, the driver resembled an old friend of the detectives, but it was neither Derek nor Zachary, which puzzled the detectives anew. They decided to check Zachary's phone records and quickly discovered that his initial statements about staying home all night with the child were lies. Instead, he had been traveling on the regular highway between St. Paul and Minneapolis. The police knew that, at that time, Zachary was staying with the victim's parents at their invitation, which provided them with a good opportunity to search his apartment without his presence. The first thing that attracted the detectives' attention was the numerous telephone books that Zachary kept in his home for some reason. They were identical to the one found in the back seat of the burnt-out car. Few people kept these books in such quantities, and the coincidence seemed strange. In addition, traces resembling blood spatters were found on the walls in the hallway. A luminol test confirmed that it was indeed blood. Even more stains were found when they checked the bedroom. On Zachary's mattress, there were spatters. The entire apartment was subjected to this test, revealing many places where there were suspicious blood stains. However, the most interesting item was a 4-page letter that was obviously addressed to Christine but was never given to her. In it, he expressed how much he missed his relationship with her and wanted her back. This was fundamentally contrary to Zachary's initial claims that they were planning to move in together. He even stated that he supported Christine and was glad she had a boyfriend. This was an obvious lie. He suffered during the separation, which could have made him jealous when he found out about Deke. In fact, he wanted her back from the very beginning. The relationship between them was not straightforward. They often argued and quarreled. Sometimes this even led to calls to the police from neighbors, although it never escalated to violence. Christine's parents were aware of the heated arguments but did not think Zachary could be dangerous. The next discovery was a pair of boots found in Zachary's closet. They were similar in description to those belonging to Christine. Interestingly, one of them was missing a lace. The detective speculated that the criminal could have used this lace to strangle her. While the detectives were waiting for the results of DNA tests, they contacted the relatives of Christine because they thought it was important to keep them informed of their findings. It was possible that Larson family was in mortal danger, living under the same roof as the suspect. When the police informed Daniel and Deborah about this, Zachary was just a few meters away from them, through the wall in his room. It was a difficult situation for the parents of Christine, but they decided to help the police. After this call, they approached him and said that the police wanted to talk again. They demonstrated all possible restraint and composure to avoid revealing the true purpose of their encounter. Upon receiving this news, Zachary was visibly upset. He expressed that he really wanted the investigation to be concluded and for the criminal to be found. Within an hour, he left and headed to the police station. From the very beginning, it was clear that they did not intend to treat him as a witness. Zachary ended up in the interrogation room, where the police were quite harsh with him. He kept insisting on his version of events, repeating over and over that he attended the festival and was with Darian. But the investigators told him they were aware of his lies and wanted to hear the truth. According to the detectives, they invited him in for questioning because they had discovered that his story was partly fictional. They didn't reveal all their evidence in the hope that the suspect would implicate himself with contradictory excuses. This went on for about 3 hours. When it became clear that their tactics were useless, they produced the letter they found in the apartment. They decided to try to appeal to his emotions, as he in the letter expressed how much he loved her. Contradictions were found in his story. He started making excuses again but seemed increasingly less confident. Eventually, under pressure, Zachary decided to tell a new story. However, it was not at all what the investigators expected to hear. According to Zachary, he went to the store shortly before 2 p.m., hoping to return before his beloved arrived. When he returned with his son, he found Christine unresponsive in the living room closet, the same place where the police found the shoes during their search. He claimed he was so scared when he found her that he decided to hide the body, fearing legal issues. He understood that this story would not be believed, so his best choice was to transport Christine by car to the outskirts of the city and abandon her. According to Zachary, he did just that and then walked more than 10 kilometers to his apartment, leaving baby Darian home alone without supervision. According to him, he did not even set fire to the car with the body, so he had no idea what happened after that. All this sounded completely implausible. His trip with the boy did not align with his fabricated story about attending the festival, making it clear that he was lying. It became evident from Zach's words that he was not involved in what happened, yet he appeared at all stages of the massacre. While this was not a confession, the police believed they would now be able to reconstruct the timeline of events from December 19th more accurately. According to the detectives, Christine had indeed come to her ex's apartment after speaking with her new boyfriend around 2:15 to 2:30 p.m. It was believed that Zachary wanted to discuss rekindling their relationship, but everyone knew that Christine was not interested in such a conversation, as she had already started dating someone new. Zachary probably didn't know about the relationship, but Christine confessed to him about her new boyfriend, which provoked a fit of anger. A conflict arose that ultimately led to murder. All this happened just on the other side of the wall from his son, but the child was too young to understand anything. Then, he took Darian and went with him to the Christmas festival by bus, leaving his beloved's body in the apartment. When he returned, he left the child alone and took the body, deciding to find a place to dispose of Christine's car and cover his tracks. The arson was planned in advance. The fire succeeded, but it did not burn as strongly as he had planned, and there were enough traces of the crime left on the body. The examination showed that the blood found in his apartment belonged to Christine, and the shoelaces were identified as the murder weapon. His DNA was also found in Christine's car. On December 24th of that year, Christmas Eve, Zachary was officially arrested and charged with the murder of Christine Larson. A little less than a year later, in October 2008, the jury found Zachary Otis Matthews guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. After that, Darian was handed over to Christine's parents, who raised him as their own son. Curiously, even the new boyfriend with whom she had a short relationship played a significant role in the child's life. He communicated with him regularly, wanting to remind the boy of what a wonderful person his mother had been. Despite their brief relationship, Derek thought Christine was a remarkable girl and mourned her deeply. He wanted Darian to never forget his mother. Zachary remains behind bars and has never admitted guilt in Christine's murder, insisting that he was framed. Therefore, accurately reconstructing what he had to endure leading up to her death, as well as determining the motive for the crime, is not possible. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Anne Margaret Carabin. Anne Margaret was born on April 5, 1959, in Poland, specifically in the city of Białystok, where she spent her childhood. Later, she moved to Canada to start a new life. She decided to settle in Mississauga, a large city in the province of Ontario, and met a man, Mr. Carabin. They got married, and in 1987, their first daughter, Caroline, was born, followed by Catherine a year later, and became a housewife, taking care of the home and children while her husband worked to provide for the family. Despite the appearance of having a happy family, Anne's husband showed little interest in parenting. He quickly grew bored with family life. As the girls grew up, more contradictions emerged in their views, and eventually, they decided to divorce. It was a difficult period, as her husband abandoned the children and resisted paying alimony, leading Anne to apply to the court. The case dragged on, causing significant financial and emotional stress. To stay afloat, Anne needed to work, and at one point, she even worked 2 jobs simultaneously, from morning to evening without days off. It was extremely hard. Despite her hard work, there was barely enough money for the 3 of them. She had no energy left to fully perform her maternal duties. During this time, Anne was constantly at work. Her children missed her dearly, hoped that she would overcome the difficulties and everything would be all right. Unfortunately, the situation only worsened. The divorce process dragged on for an extended period and fell into depression. This emotional turmoil began to take a toll, especially as she was in a foreign country and could not see her loved ones to share her feelings. She longed to find a new partner for support, yet she didn't even have time for her children, let alone a personal life. Even friends were hard to come by, as maintaining friendships required time she simply did not have. Instead, and found solace in alcohol, she began to drink a little to fall asleep faster and relax. A significant turning point for her came when she met a man named Doug at one of her jobs. They started dating, and gradually, she introduced him to her daughters. Doug seemed like a suitable partner for the future, so they decided to get married. At first, everything went well, and believed she had finally found happiness, thinking their life would return to normal. In the first year of marriage, and gave birth to a son, Robert. However, from then on, the relationship became increasingly tense. Doug exhibited bad character traits, such as aggression, intemperance. He constantly drank, lost his temper, and behaved unpredictably. His actions escalated to the point where Caroline and Catherine had to intervene to protect their mother from beatings. The worst part was that Doug targeted not only but also the girls, and continued to seek solace in alcohol, consuming more over time. Soon, she became dependent on it. When intoxicated, she was not aggressive but would simply fall asleep. Doug took advantage of the situation, and according to her daughters, he repeatedly abused them. This continued for quite a while before and discovered what was happening. When she finally confronted Doug about it, he attacked her and threatened her. Initially, she was at a loss about what to do. Despite her children's complaints, she was terrified of leaving her husband, plunging back into poverty, loneliness, and depression. Caroline took matters into her own hands, trying desperately to achieve justice and stop the violence. Unfortunately, no one listened to her or took any action. The Supreme Court could not overlook Doug's behavior forever, especially as he became increasingly cruel. Finally, in 2001, Doug was jailed for domestic violence, with additional charges added for drunk driving. However, his abuse accusations went unaddressed, leaving the girls feeling that justice had not been served. Any further complaints were simply ignored by the authorities. Caroline and Catherine felt relief that Doug, the dangerous man, was isolated and no longer posed a threat to them. Nevertheless, it was also the beginning of a new life for Anne, who was left alone with her 3 children. At this time, her daughters held high hopes that their mother could pull herself together, quit drinking, and improve their lives. However, the family dynamic suffered as they were all traumatized, and began to drink even more than before, significantly worsening the situation. She could no longer control her addiction, spending all the money she earned from several jobs on alcohol. Caroline and Catherine understood that their mother needed help but felt powerless to assist her. By that time, they had become teenagers, could partially care for themselves and their younger brother. This allowed them a bit of independence, but they still felt a significant lack of their mother's attention. As they grew up, conflicts increased, and disagreements became common. The atmosphere in the house turned tense, with constant arguments. The situation deteriorated further when both schoolgirls experimented with alcohol and marijuana. They spoke very badly of their mother, and as they entered a difficult adolescence, the sisters began to skip school. The situation at home is escalating. Those around them noticed the decline in their standard of living. Caroline and Catherine looked at their peers, realized that their friends had nice houses, beautiful clothes, delicious food, and loving parents, all of which they lacked. Even an evening dinner with their mother did not resemble family get-togethers. Family members had become very distant from each other. Some acquaintances supported the sisters, fed them, and gave them various things, but all of this was not enough for the teenage girls to feel normal. At the same time, they were very smart, energetic, and active. Teachers described their intelligence as above average. They succeeded in education and were expected to find decent jobs in the future. However, at that moment, they dreamed of becoming popular, wearing fashionable clothes like other girls who had no issues with their parents. Yet, there was something alarming in the behavior of these children. Some teachers noticed that Caroline and Catherine had a real talent for manipulating people. They easily achieved what they needed from others, and if they did something wrong, they often got away with it. Later, they dropped out of school altogether. As they grew, their dissatisfaction with their mother only grew, and soon real hatred for her awakened. They openly declared that she was a worthless mother who only thought of herself and her alcohol. Caroline and Catherine's turned to relatives, their father, and others for help, but no one did anything to assist them. Their negativity toward their mother only intensified. By 2002, they could no longer watch how she was ruining herself and them. In their minds, they began to mature a frightening plan. At that time, Caroline was 15 years old and Catherine was 14, but this did not stop them from developing a plan for a bloody massacre. They wanted to help their mother, but in a very distorted way. Their main goal was to save her from suffering. They wanted to do this in such a way as to gain popularity while also remaining winners. Caroline and Catherine knew that a life insurance policy for $200,000 had been issued for their mother. The mother had taken it out as soon as she had the opportunity at work, in case something happened to her. In this way, she insured and provided for her children. But Caroline and Catherine did not want to wait. They decided it was time to start an independent life. The sisters understood that they would not receive money if it were proven that their mother died at their hands, so the plan had to be carefully worked out. Thus, a school project called How to Kill a Mother was created. Initially, even they themselves perceived it as a joke. They shared it with their classmates and hoped to attract enthusiasts who would help find the best way to carry out the crime. They showed interest and constantly discussed various details of the murder so that they could execute it without getting caught. They began communicating with other teenagers and openly discussing everything in a specially created group. Their friends chose options, considering a gun or a knife. However, both sisters did not want blood and suffering for their victim, so they concluded that the most painless, simple way to kill their mother was by drowning. For some reason, they believed this was the easiest method with which they could quickly and easily cope, especially leave no traces. Naturally, all of this was actively discussed on social media, and many young people were involved in developing a plan for a murder without even realizing they were discussing a real crime. Nevertheless, everything quickly turned into serious crime planning. Caroline and Catherine began discussing it with classmates in the hope of understanding what difficulties awaited them and how to divert police suspicions from themselves, avoid punishment. They talked about other issues, particularly how to guarantee money from the insurance policy. The sisters planned to collect $200,000 from their mother's life insurance and actively discussed with classmates what they wanted to buy with this money. Caroline and Catherine envisioned buying a new cozy house and cultivating a plantation of marijuana there. With the first harvest and sale of substances, they planned to travel with friends to Europe, particularly Amsterdam. Ultimately, the sisters paid a lot of attention to their plot, which seemed meticulously thought out to the smallest detail. Finally, on the evening of January 11, 2003, Caroline and Catherine decided to kill their mother. However, disagreements arose with their group of like-minded peers, as a party among teenagers was planned for the same day, and everyone feared that the murder could cancel the festivities. It seemed implausible that the school children still did not take the sisters' idea seriously. One way or another, they were persuaded to postpone the bloody act for a week. It was rescheduled for January 18th. On that Saturday morning, the daughters approached their mother, unusually offering her a bottle of vodka. This made her very happy and blissfully. They began pouring shot after shot while simultaneously adding medicine to each glass, substances that serve as painkillers which, when combined with alcohol, could have very dangerous effects, including potential lethality. However, the sisters' goal was not to poison her. They did not even particularly hide the fact that they were giving her pills. Their mother saw this but willingly took them along with the strong alcohol, believing it would help her. All of this happened literally live on air. Caroline and Catherine constantly wrote to their friends in a messaging app, providing updates on the different stages of the process. When the bottle of vodka ran out, their mother was very drunk and sleepy. One of their friends even wished them luck and gave them a last piece of advice: to wear disposable gloves. Caroline and Catherine took his advice and used protective equipment, which logically made one of their classmates an accomplice in the crime they were about to commit, as he seemed unaware of the seriousness of the situation. As their mother's condition worsened, due to the pills combined with alcohol, the effects intensified. Finally, they suggested she take a relaxing bath and also get a massage. She agreed. They helped their mother to get up. She could barely stand on her feet, so it took them about half an hour to get to the bathroom. They then helped her undress. Caroline and Catherine suggested that their mother needed a back massage, asked her to lie on her stomach. Obviously, in her state, and could not think rationally, so she complied with this absurd demand. At this point, the eldest daughter began to drown her. She tried to resist but lacked the strength to fight back. She pushed her hands against the bottom of the bathtub with all her might, and could not rise to breathe. The sisters believed that in order for she to drown, it was necessary to keep her submerged for 4 minutes. Catherine stood nearby, periodically counting down to support her sister. Naturally, when Caroline finally let go of their mother, and showed no signs of life, Caroline and Catherine was elated that their plan had worked. They even screamed with joy. Afterward, they informed their group that the project had succeeded. Now they had to cover their tracks and divert suspicion from themselves. This had also been carefully planned. They arranged to meet friends at a restaurant, leaving their mother's body in the bathroom, and went to Odnoklassniki. Their first toast was specifically for the successful murder of their mother. Caroline and Catherine spent several hours there before returning home. A few minutes after they arrived, an emergency call came in from distraught people claiming they had found their mother's body in the bathtub. The ambulance attempted to resuscitate her, but of course, it was too late, as she had already been in the water for several hours. Caroline and Catherine crying constantly and appearing inconsolable. Interestingly, to play out this tragicomedy, one of them had even trained with someone from Odnoklassniki who was involved in a theater club. The scene was prepared and executed very carefully. From the outside, it seemed that the drunk mother had simply fallen asleep in the bathtub and drowned, making it look like an accident. However, the experience of the police suggested otherwise. Detectives rarely deal with drownings, most often it's small children who die when left unattended, so it appeared strange for an adult woman, especially one in a state of strong intoxication, to get into the bathtub unaided. How could she even manage to undress, climb in without falling and hurting herself? Everything seemed illogical. Nevertheless, the sisters had planned everything well, even leaving a glass from which their mother had drunk in the bathroom to reinforce the police's suspicion of an accident. They managed to eliminate any traces of a struggle. Of course, no one had entered the house, which meant there were no strangers present. Naturally, given their age and the fact that they were upset teenage girls, no one expected that they were capable of drowning their own mother. In any case, the police needed to talk to Caroline and Catherine to clarify the details. Both sisters told an emotional story about how they discovered their mother without signs of life after returning from a restaurant. They admitted that when they left home, she had been drinking, but there was nothing unusual about it since she had been an alcoholic for several years. And had never been aggressive, rather, she tried to drown her sorrows from hard work days and failures in her personal life. According to them, they returned around 2 a.m. and immediately discovered their mother's body. They called emergency services to report the situation. Now, it was necessary to determine where Caroline and Catherine would live until they reached adulthood. Their younger brother, Robert, who was only 3 years old, was with his father at the time. Thanks to his sisters, the boy was doomed to grow up without a mother. Meanwhile, forensic scientists were working at the scene of the alleged accident. They relied on the temperature of the water, which had long since cooled to the level of the ambient air in the room, indicating that and had been dead for several hours before she was discovered. No signs of violence could be found on her body. However, Caroline and Catherine did not manage to commit the perfect crime so as to go unnoticed. The forensic expert noted that traces of desperate attempts remained on the victim's body, as if she had risen from under the water to take a breath while struggling against someone who was holding her. Barely noticeable marks were found on the tips of her fingers. In addition, Anne tried so hard to save herself that she tore off several nails. Despite this, after a toxicological examination, all the doubts of the police were dispelled. A lethal dose of alcohol was found in her body. Therefore, her death was immediately recognized as an accident resulting from drowning while under the influence of alcohol. The investigation was closed. Their aunt took Caroline and Catherine, becoming their guardian. As the girls planned, they received money from their mother's life insurance, part of which went to summer camp. It seemed that this initially humorous school project had evolved into the perfect crime, one that would evade justice. Caroline and Catherine simply could not remain silent about their success. They clearly did not feel the slightest remorse. They bragged that they were able to not only kill their mother but also get money while avoiding justice. Now they wanted to fulfill their dream of buying a beautiful house and planting it with weeds. However, they did not have time to implement their large-scale plan. 11 months after their mother's death, one of Caroline's friends went to the police to report the killers. From the very beginning, she was aware of what was happening. She so tormented by the pangs of conscience that she could not sleep normally. The friend revealed the truth about the planning and preparation of the crime that took place online, providing detectives access to her computer, where all these dialogues were recorded. Not only did the police see how this cruel plan was drawn up, but there were also numerous confessions from each of the sisters. However, the investigators believed that something more substantial was needed, so they decided to use this friend to obtain new evidence. Listening and recording devices were installed in the car. Now all that was left was to catch the criminals in a confession. In fact, it was quite simple to do this because Caroline and Catherine literally could not talk about anything else except the murder. Even after almost a year, it was enough to bring up this topic for them to start describing the process and their skills as killers. They continued to willingly talk about this event with obvious pride and without remorse. However, until that moment, few took the statements of theirs seriously. Now their talkativeness allowed the police to probe the details of the insidious plan. In particular, the sisters mentioned the pills that were never found during the initial toxicology examination. The test simply had not been carried out in full. After a lethal dose of alcohol was detected in the blood, everything else was discarded as unimportant. Finally, all the secrets became clear. On January 21, 2004, at 7 a.m., the police arrived at the house where Caroline and Catherine lived. Both girls were arrested and taken to the police station in their pajamas. They were still asleep. The computers of the main suspects were also confiscated. During interrogations, both denied their guilt. They tried their best to demonstrate innocent behavior. They even refused to wear the clothes that the police offered them. Both remained in their pajamas. This was probably intended to enhance their innocence. Of course, no one believed them. Under the pressure of evidence, the older girl, Caroline, quickly cracked. She burst into tears and admitted that she had killed her mother. Curiously, the younger sister Catherine could not be broken. She withstood hours of police interrogation, but still insisted on her innocence. Nevertheless, by this time, detectives had restored the browser history and harvested data from the computers, which allowed them to discover new shocking details of the cold-blooded crime. Investigators reviewed all the correspondence that the witness had provided. It was evident that Caroline and Catherine were unhappy due to their mother's alcohol addiction. From these electronic sources, sufficient data was available to accuse the sisters of premeditated murder in the Supreme Court of Canada. Given their age, juvenile justice was involved in the case. Curiously, both were released on bail and placed under house arrest pending trial. In late 2005, they went to trial and were convicted of first-degree murder. Eventually, in June 2006, the hearings began, and it was notable that they wore the same pajamas in which they had been arrested. Many believe this was a deliberate manipulation of the jury to elicit sympathy for the sisters. However, this did not significantly impact the prosecution, which presented two motives for the murder: the pursuit of insurance money and the desire to escape the vicious cycle of their mother's alcohol addiction. Judging by the correspondence, the sisters even saw this as a means of providing relief for their suffering mother. During the hearings, dozens of other schoolmates appeared, all of whom had participated in the same project, played roles in the planning, and offered advice, which meant they could well have been considered accomplices. Ultimately, none of them were prosecuted, as it was determined that they did not fully grasp the seriousness of Caroline and Catherine's intentions, believed it was merely a game. With the solid foundation of evidence the prosecution had, Caroline and Catherine had no chance of escaping punishment. They were found guilty of first-degree murder. However, for minors under this charge, the maximum sentence was only 10 years in prison, of which they would serve only 6 years behind bars. The remaining 4 years would be under house arrest due to good behavior. The younger sister, Catherine, was released in 2009. By this time, Catherine was 21 years old. Shortly thereafter, Caroline was also released at 23. Under the Canadian Privacy and Protection Act, their names were not initially disclosed in the media. However, it was impossible to keep this information hidden for long, as they spoke too openly about their horrific crime. The defense did not succeed, and their identities were revealed. Nonetheless, this did not prevent them from starting a new life. Both sisters entered college and earned their degrees. Catherine graduated from law school, got married, while Caroline pursued a career in technology to become a scientist. Later, she became a single mother and fully understood the difficulties her own mother had struggled with in the past. 17 years after the cold-blooded murders, in 2020, Caroline spoke to the media. By this time, she was 33 years old. She stated that she had radically re-evaluated her actions and now regretted them every day. She viewed her mother as a strong woman who tried to keep her family afloat but became depressed due to ongoing financial problems and difficult relationships with men. Caroline herself was traumatized and, like her children, could not fully comprehend the magnitude of what was happening at that time. She simply decided to rid herself of what she deemed unwanted burdens. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Adrienne Shelly. Adrienne Shelly, whose real last name was Levine, was a well-known actress, director, and screenwriter. She was born on June 24, 1966, in Queens, New York, USA. From a very young age, she displayed a natural talent for acting. Her parents noticed her abilities early on and supported her by enrolling her in various theater programs and acting classes. By the age of 10, Adrienne began attending one of the most prestigious art centers, where many notable actors, including Robert Downey Jr. and Natalie Portman, had studied. It was there that Adrienne discovered her passion for performing. At the age of 11, she landed her first major role as the lead character in a musical, an experience she later described as the beginning of her journey toward success. Despite increasingly love acting, she is still a normal teenager, likes to spend time with friends and easily make friends thanks to her outward personality. At the age of 12, Adrienne faced a devastating loss when her father, Sheldon, suddenly passed away. To honor his memory, she chose Shelley as her stage name, preserving his name in her work. Her father had been her strongest supporter, much more so than her mother. After his death, her mother attempted to steer her in a different direction, suggesting she pursue a more traditional academic path at university. She also encouraged Adrienne to consider the film industry but warned that acting was a highly competitive and overcrowded field, where success could be elusive. Her mother believed it might be wiser to pursue a simpler and more secure profession. However, Adrienne was determined and steadfast in her aspirations. She confidently pursued her passion, enrolling at Boston University to study film production with a focus on directing. Although most sources indicate she didn't complete her university degree, the knowledge and experience she gained there proved vital to her future success. What truly propelled her forward was her persistence and strong self-belief. At the age of 18, Adrienne left the family's house and moved to live in an apartment with 3 other girls from her university. Adrienne and her friends all aspired to become actresses, but success for them was initially limited to auditioning and encountering rejections. The film industry was highly competitive, and securing roles proved difficult. Despite these challenges, Adrienne remained determined to establish herself in cinema. She spent her free time taking small roles as an extra in films, which was enough to cover her living expenses. In 1989, a turning point came when she met film director Hal Hartley. He offered her the lead role in The Unbelievable Truth, marking the official start of her acting career. Her relationship with Hartley blossomed, and she became his muse, burning roles in several of his films. This recognition extended beyond New York to Hollywood, where she gradually built her reputation in the U.S. film industry. She received offers for leading roles in Los Angeles but turned down most of them, choosing to focus her career in New York. To her, New York had a deeper connection to the film industry than Hollywood. Adrienne continued to grow professionally without relocating. She focused on her craft and steadily laid the foundation for her success. She appeared in numerous productions, including comedies, and during this time, decided to explore screenwriting and directing. In 2001, she met Andy Ostroy, with whom she entered into a romantic relationship. They got married, and in 2003 welcomed their daughter, Sophie. While pregnant, Adrienne began writing the script for the comedy film Waitress. The story featured a realistic portrayal. The main character was pregnant and trying to escape from her abusive husband, who tormented her throughout their marriage. This was a bold move, as pregnancy in films is usually depicted in a positive light. Adrienne chose to highlight the challenges women face during this time, offering a fresh and innovative perspective. After giving birth to her daughter, Sophie, Adrienne decided to continue pursuing her career in the film industry. Waitress became a true success and marked a significant milestone in her career. The film premiered in 2007, but tragically, Adrienne did not live to see its triumph, as she had passed away before its release. While working on the film, she rented an office on Abingdon Square in Manhattan's West Village. It was a simple apartment where she often worked alone. For her, this space was a personal sanctuary, offering a sense of safety amidst her creativity. Adrienne crafted a unique atmosphere in her work environment, showing great care and reverence for her improvised studio. She approached her work with meticulous attention to detail, one that visitors often remarked was almost excessive. It was clear to everyone that Adrienne had a promising future ahead of her, which made the tragic and shocking end of her career all the more devastating. November 1, 2006, started as a typical day for Adrienne and her family. She woke up early to prepare for work in her office, while her husband, Andy, and their daughter, Sophie, followed their usual morning routine. Andy, an actor and producer, took Sophie to kindergarten and then headed to work, dropping Adrienne off at her workplace along the way. Throughout their relationship, Adrienne and Andy maintained the habit of staying in regular contact during the day, frequently calling each other to share updates. This tradition had remained unbroken for years. However, on November 1st, Adrienne's silence was startling. She didn't call Andy and failed to answer any of his calls, which was completely out of character for her. Andy wasn't initially worried. He understood how devoted Adrienne was to her work and assumed she might be tied up, especially since she had planned to start several new projects that day. He figured she was deeply engrossed and decided not to disturb her over minor issues. Andy worked through the day until evening, but when he wrapped up his shift and called her again, she still didn't answer. By this point, her lack of communication was unusual. Adrienne typically made time to reach out during her busy periods or at least send a quick message. Her silence was becoming increasingly concerning. Around 5:30 p.m., Andy picked up his daughter from kindergarten. Adrienne was still unreachable, and his concern deepened. Her behavior was unlike her. Normally, she would have checked in or let him know if she was occupied. Worried, Andy decided to drive to her rented office, a habit he often practiced on gloomy days like this due to the poor weather in New York. He tried calling her again to arrange a pickup time but received no response. By now, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was wrong. Andy took his daughter, Sophie, to her grandmother's house and asked the grandmother to watch Sophie while he went to the office. Without a spare key to the building, he approached the doorman upon arrival, hoping to gain access with a duplicate key. The concierge refused to give Andy the key due to strict building policies, prompting Andy to suggest they go upstairs together. The doorman was familiar with Adrienne, as she was a celebrity, and recognized her husband as well. He mentioned that Adrienne hadn't left the building all day, which was unusual because her work should have been finished, and she should have been preparing to leave. The concierge agreed to Andy's suggestion, but when they reached the floor, they realized the keys weren't needed, the door was unlocked. This was unexpected, as Adrienne was always meticulous about locking her office, even for brief absences. Typically, she would secure the door from the inside to ensure privacy and avoid interruptions. Once inside the studio, Andy immediately noticed Adrienne's clothes and shoes in their usual place, a designated spot reserved for them. This indicated that she was likely still inside. He began calling her name as he moved through the rooms. In the kitchen, bags of food remained untouched. In the bedroom, the bed was partially disheveled, with its sheet torn off, yet there was no sign of Adrienne. When he entered the bathroom, he was horrified to discover the lifeless body of her. She was hanging from a sheet tied to the shower rod. Shocked and panicked, Andy screamed and immediately tried to lower his wife's body in an attempt to save her. The building's caretaker, who was nearby, heard the commotion and immediately called police and emergency services, sensing the gravity of the situation. Upon their arrival, officers found Andy in tears, overwhelmed by grief and unable to compose himself for some time. Investigators initially concluded that Adrienne, a successful actress and director, had ended her life. However, Andy adamantly rejected this conclusion, refusing to believe it. He insisted that his wife did not suffer from depression, mental illness, or addiction. There were no signs, not even the slightest indication, that could suggest she would voluntarily end her own life. On the contrary, Adrienne appeared to be thriving at this point in her life. Her career was on an upward trajectory, with each new production surpassing the last. She had a loving relationship with Andy and a deep bond with their young daughter, Sophie, whom she cherished. From Andy's perspective, Adrienne would never willingly leave her daughter behind, especially given her own experience of losing her father at age 12 and understanding the profound pain such a loss could inflict on a child. Despite Andy's assertions, law enforcement maintained that depression could often be hidden, with symptoms that weren't necessarily tied to struggles in one's family or personal life. They explained that individuals could appear outwardly fine, even happy, while quietly battling unseen difficulties until the very end. Throughout this time, Andy refused to back down. He tirelessly urged law enforcement to conduct a more thorough investigation, steadfastly believing that Adrienne had been murdered. He committed himself to proving this, despite the daunting challenges ahead. The autopsy revealed that Adrienne's death was caused by a sheet tied around her neck, but Andy doubled down on his efforts, insisting the case be treated as a homicide. To substantiate such claims, however, concrete evidence was necessary. The scene showed no signs of blood, struggle, or any obvious clues suggesting the presence of an intruder on the day of Adrienne's death. However, some unusual details came to light. Would someone who was about to end their life go shopping and behave as though they had plans for the following day? Upon closer examination of the crime scene, investigators discovered a suspicious clue, a faint shoe print on the toilet lid. This led them to suspect that it might have been left by an unknown person. It is possible that the attacker, or possibly Adrienne herself, stood on the toilet lid to reach the shower curtain rod and tie the sheet. Andy immediately recognized the shoe print on the toilet lid as evidence of a criminal presence. He explained to investigators that Adrienne kept her office very clean. Adrienne had installed a special closet and cabinet near the entrance, requiring everyone to remove their shoes or boots before entering. Walking around the apartment in footwear was strictly forbidden, and Adrienne would become extremely upset when this rule was violated. Therefore, Andy firmly believed that the shoe print could only have been left by someone who entered the studio without her permission. Adrienne's fastidiousness regarding cleanliness was well known among her close friends and family, all of whom confirmed it during interviews with detectives. Upon realizing the connection, investigators scrutinized the shoe prints, paying close attention to the tread pattern and size. Their findings supported Andy's claims. The print did not match the shoes worn by either him or his wife. Furthermore, fingerprints were discovered on the shower rod that did not belong to Adrienne. While it appeared that someone had tried to wipe them away, the effort had been incomplete, leaving traces for investigators to uncover. Adrienne's close acquaintances were investigated, but none of them had shoes matching the traces found. Furthermore, their fingerprints did not match those recovered from the scene. Analysis of the residue on the toilet lid revealed it was chalk or a similar type of dust, typically uncommon in homes or offices without ongoing repairs. Detectives speculated that the traces might belong to someone employed in the construction or renovation industry. Initially, they theorized that Adrian might have scheduled a repair appointment for that day. However, there was no evidence or information to support this theory. Adrian would have informed her husband if she had made such arrangements. In reality, everything in the studio was in perfect condition. She had no need for the services of a contractor. Detectives investigating the case remembered a remarkable detail. When Adrian was found dead in her studio, someone reported hearing noises that sounded like hammers and drills. Initially, the police were skeptical about this detail but decided to investigate further. It turned out that renovation work was indeed taking place in the apartment directly below Adrian's studio. The apartment owner, who had no connection to Adrian and didn't even know her, confirmed that workers were present on November 1st, completing the final stages of the renovation. He himself was not present in the apartment at the time because the construction company needed access to tear down walls and install new partitions. This detail intrigued the detectives, as such work generates significant dust capable of leaving white marks. The apartment owner granted them permission to inspect the site, where they found substantial dust samples, which were subsequently sent to the lab for testing. Laboratory results confirmed that the dust matched the residue found in Adrian's studio, indicating that at least one worker from the renovation had entered her office. Detectives then contacted the general contractor at Bradford General Contractors to identify the workers who had been on site during that period. At this stage, investigators encountered difficulties due to the company's practice of cutting costs by hiring workers who were not officially employed. This was common in the United States at the time, especially with the influx of migrants. Many workers were undocumented and lacked proper visas. However, following a period of investigation, the individual overseeing the project verified the list of everyone present at the apartment on November 1st. Among them, the most suspicious was Diego Pilco, a 19-year-old who had recently arrived in the U.S. from Ecuador. Upon his arrival, he started working for Bradford to save money. Initially, he planned to use the earnings to repay a debt in his native Ecuador, which had helped finance his journey to the United States. Diego's behavior drew attention. He often appeared anxious and acted strangely. He was still working for Bradford when investigators tracked him down. They brought him to the police station for questioning, where detectives got straight to the point. Diego was directly asked about Adrian's murder. Surprisingly, he did not deny it. Instead, he confessed almost immediately upon entering the office. He explained his account of the incident, repeatedly stressing that it had been accidental. He insisted he was not a bad person but was struggling with severe financial difficulties and had acted out of desperation. Diego revealed that on November 1st, he was working in the apartment below Adrian's studio alongside several other laborers, completing the final stages of the renovation. The demolition of walls created substantial noise, which was expected given the nature of the work. About an hour into their tasks, Adrian became upset with the loud noise. Frustrated, she angrily shouted that the noise was interfering with her ability to focus. Diego felt her behavior was condescending, as if she were implying her work was more important than theirs. She demanded the workers stop making noise, but Diego considered this unreasonable, as demolishing walls could not be done quietly. The young workers calmly explained the situation to Adrian. However, she refused to listen. She entered the apartment and began yelling. Frustrated, Diego grabbed a hammer and threw it in her direction. Miraculously, she dodged the tool. She then started shouting even louder and threatened to call the police. With that, she left the apartment and headed upstairs. Worried about the possible consequences of his actions and fearing deportation, Diego followed her, desperately pleading for her not to involve the authorities. Adrian was furious and ignored his pleas. Once she arrived at her studio, Diego grabbed her sleeve, still begging her not to report him. She may have interpreted his actions as an attack and began screaming. Losing control once again, Diego struck her in the face. Adrian fell, hit her head, and stopped moving. Convinced that she had died from the blow, Diego panicked. He locked himself in the office, overwhelmed and unsure of what to do next. Adrian remained still and did not get up. Eventually, Diego realized he had killed someone and decided to cover up the crime. He took a bed sheet and staged the scene to make it look like Adrian had voluntarily ended her life. This was the initial version of his confession, but the police did not believe his story. One key issue they identified was the absence of dust on Adrienne's shoes. If she had indeed entered the apartment under renovation, as Diego claimed, there would have been dust on her footwear. Moreover, Adrienne's shoes were discovered neatly arranged on a specially prepared cabinet, indicating that she had deliberately taken them off. This detail contradicted Diego's claim that there had been no time for her to take off her shoes or place them there. Another significant inconsistency was the lack of witnesses to Adrienne's alleged aggression. Although Diego claimed that she had come downstairs and shouted at the workers, none of them confirmed his statement. Additionally, neighbors in nearby apartments, who were present at the time, should have heard the commotion if Adrienne had caused a scene. However, none of them reported hearing anything. Detectives uncovered another crucial detail when Andy mentioned that her wallet contained no cash, a notable discrepancy, as she normally carried cash, preferring it over credit cards. She would routinely keep at least a couple $100s on her, sometimes more for various needs. This habit helped investigators identify a possible motive, an illegal immigrant seeking to profit from Adrienne's belongings. Moreover, forensic analysis revealed that the circumstances of her death did not align with Diego's initial confession. She had still been alive when she was hanged. Her actual cause of death was strangulation, with no evidence of a fatal head injury. Despite these glaring contradictions, Diego persisted in sticking to his story for a while, maintaining that Adrienne had initiated the conflict. However, under pressure from mounting evidence and inconsistencies, Diego's account began to change significantly. Detectives interviewed his acquaintances to gather insights into his character but found that he had limited interactions outside work. His colleagues described him as someone struggling with financial issues, desperately trying to pay off debts. Beyond this, he seemed to be an ordinary young man hoping to establish his life in the U.S. Further investigations among the residents of the apartment building revealed additional witnesses. Diego had a troubling habit of staring at women for extended periods, an unsettling behavior that made residents uncomfortable. However, no one had observed him behaving aggressively or attacking anyone. Adrienne's husband, Andy, continued to insist that Diego's account was false and merely an attempt to justify his actions. Andy maintained that his wife was never aggressive and always treated others with respect, regardless of their background. The missing cash from her wallet pointed to a clear motive. Although valuable equipment and supplies remained intact, the loss of several $100s remained unexplained. Before the trial, scheduled for 2008, Diego presented a new explanation that was more plausible than his initial story. He claimed that he had been drinking while at work and encountered Adrienne in the elevator. He stared at her and suddenly realized she was someone famous. Recognizing her as an actress, he quickly assumed that she likely had money. Seeing this as an opportunity to resolve his financial problems, he believed breaking into her apartment presented a chance to profit. Pretending to head to the top floor, Diego carefully noted the apartment Adrienne entered. He spent the day observing and listening, waiting for the moment she would leave, possibly to go to the store. Later, when she returned with shopping bags, she left the door slightly ajar as her hands were full. After placing her bags down, she moved to the kitchen, likely to organize her groceries. Out of habit, she undressed and placed her clothes and shoes in the closets. Meanwhile, Diego discreetly watched her every move from the landing just outside her apartment. As the door was left partially ajar, Diego noticed the gap and spotted a bag with a wallet peeking out. Unable to resist the temptation, he saw an opportunity to steal. Peeking inside the apartment, he confirmed Adrienne was unaware of his presence and entered. He grabbed the wallet and took the cash. As he tried to return the wallet to the bag, Adrienne unexpectedly returned and confronted him. She screamed and rushed toward the phone, presumably to call the police. Panicking, Diego chased after her and covered her mouth and nose to silence her. Within moments, Adrian lost consciousness due to suffocation. Realizing that leaving Adrian alive was too risky, as she had seen him and could easily identify him, he decided to stage her death to end her life. He used a bed sheet and shower curtain rod to make it look like she had voluntarily ended her life. He later admitted in court that he had stood on the toilet lid to hang her. During the trial, he apologized to Adrienne's family, whose lives had been shattered by her tragic and untimely death. Unsurprisingly, his apology was met with no forgiveness. Andy, the husband of Adrienne, was determined to ensure that the perpetrator, whom he referred to as a subhuman, would receive a life sentence. However, he was deeply shocked when the court ruled the case as manslaughter and sentenced Diego to 25 years in prison. Diego is set to be released shortly before his 45th birthday. Though Andy found the verdict profoundly unjust, he had no choice but to accept the court's decision as final. Following this tragic incident, Andy dedicated himself to honoring his wife's memory. He established a foundation in her name, providing scholarships and financial support to aspiring women filmmakers. Additionally, Andy created a film about Adrienne, recounting the difficult and heroic journey of her life. For the film's final scene, he personally met with Diego, who gave a brief interview and recounted his crimes on camera.